My wife and I were sitting in a restaurant when a man rushed over, pointed at me, and snarled, "Who is this?" My wife froze. Sup, Reddit. Name's Damien, 34 male, 6 years of marriage, and I thought I had it all figured out. Turns out my wife had been living a double life and clowning me behind my back. Grab some popcorn and enjoy the shit show. I remember checking my watch, wondering if the waiter forgot about our appetizers. 8 p.m. on a Saturday night, our sixth wedding anniversary. Catherine had picked the restaurant, some overpriced place downtown. She said she wanted somewhere special. Let me tell you about my wife. Catherine was the kind of woman who thought the world owed her something. Beautiful, sure. High cheekbones, perfect hair, a smile that could get her whatever she wanted. But underneath all that, she was always doing the math on what everyone could do for her. I didn't see it when we were dating, but by year 3, I definitely did. By year 6, I just accepted it as the cost of keeping the peace. That was my first mistake. The second was thinking the peace was worth keeping. I'm a plumber. I own my own business, 12 employees, and contracts with 3 property management companies across the city. Not glamorous work, but I built something real from nothing. Started with a van and a wrench. Now I've got an office, a warehouse, and a reputation that keeps the phone ringing. Catherine never missed a chance to remind people at parties that her husband fixed toilets for a living. She'd laugh like it was a joke, then change the subject to something that made her look better. It was never a joke. The restaurant was packed that night. Couples everywhere. First dates and anniversaries and the occasional awkward business dinner. She was being extra charming. Kept touching my hand across the table, laughing at things that weren't funny, complimenting my shirt like she hadn't seen it 100 times before. She was nervous. That's when I noticed movement from across the room. A guy heading straight toward us. Tall, athletic build, dark hair. He wasn't scanning for an empty table. He was locked onto us, coming right at our table with an expression that said someone was about to have a very bad night. He stopped right next to us and pointed his finger directly at me. His voice was loud enough that the surrounding tables went quiet. "Who is this, Catherine?" I looked at my wife, expecting her to laugh it off. But she didn't laugh. She didn't say anything. Her face went white. Her hands started trembling. The silence stretched. 3 seconds. 5 seconds. Felt like forever. I turned back to the guy, made direct eye contact, and something passed between us. His eyes flicked to Catherine's frozen face, registered her obvious guilt, then came back to me. I watched him do the math. He blinked, took a half step back. His posture shifted. "Oh man, my bad," he said, his voice completely different now. Casual, embarrassed. "I thought she was someone else. You two look just like... Never mind. Wrong couple. Sorry about that. Enjoy your dinner." Smooth. He gave me the slightest nod, barely noticeable, something Catherine couldn't have seen from her angle, and turned away. Walked back across the restaurant like nothing had happened. Catherine let out this huge breath. Her color slowly returned. "That was so weird," she said, her voice a little too high. "Must have mistaken me for someone. People say I have one of those faces. Crazy, right?" "Crazy," I agreed. But I was already thinking. That guy knew her name. He'd said Catherine, clear as day. He knew exactly who she was. And the way she'd frozen told me everything her mouth was too smart to admit. We finished dinner. Catherine relaxed as the evening went on, probably convincing herself that I'd bought the mistaken identity story. She ordered dessert, talked about wanting to redo the master bathroom, and mentioned something about her sister Daphne coming to visit next weekend. Normal stuff. I nodded along, said the right things at the right times, while my brain quietly ran through every suspicious moment from the past year. Late nights at work that didn't match her actual workload. Weekend brunches with friends I'd never met. Phone calls she'd taken another room. Texts that made her smile in ways she never smiled at me anymore. All those little moments I'd written off as normal marriage stuff were suddenly forming a pattern so obvious, I felt like an idiot for missing it. When she excused herself to use the restroom, I moved fast. I grabbed a napkin from our table, wrote my phone number on it with the pen I always carry, and flagged down our waiter. "See that guy at the bar? Dark hair, gray shirt?" The waiter glanced over. "Yeah? Give him this. Tell him we should talk." The waiter looked at the napkin, then at me, then at the empty chair where Catherine had been sitting. Rough night? He asked. Dude, you have no idea. He pocketed the napkin. I got you. And for what it's worth, I've seen that lady in here before. She wasn't with you. Middle of the afternoon, maybe 2 months ago. Same guy from the bar. The bill was already pushing 300, so I just rounded up to an even number and added 20 more for his trouble. Worth it for that piece of information. Catherine came back from the bathroom with fresh lipstick and a smile that didn't reach her eyes. We drove home in comfortable silence. She fell asleep quickly that night, probably exhausted from the adrenaline crash. I laid awake until 3 in the morning, staring at the ceiling, replaying every detail, waiting for my phone to ring. His name was Enzo. He called me at noon the next day. The conversation was short, careful, both of us dancing around the obvious. Neither of us wanted to say too much over the phone. We agreed to meet at a diner on the east side of town. I told Catherine I had an emergency call from one of my property management clients, some burst pipe in a commercial building that needed immediate attention. She barely looked up from her phone, didn't even ask which building. 6 years of marriage, and she couldn't be bothered to fake interest in my work for 5 seconds. Enzo was already in a booth when I arrived, back to the wall, facing the door. I slid into the seat across from him. Neither of us spoke for a solid minute. Just two guys sitting in a diner booth, trying to figure out what you're supposed to say to the man who's been sleeping with your wife. The waitress came by, we both ordered coffee, and she left us alone. This is weird, Enzo said finally. Yeah, I keep thinking I should apologize, but I'm not sure what I'd be apologizing for. I didn't know. I know you didn't know. He stirred his coffee. 6 months, he said. She told me she was separated. Said her husband was basically just a roommate, that the divorce papers were already being drawn up, that she was just waiting for everything to finalize before moving out. I nodded, processing. We've been married 6 years. No separation. No divorce papers. Not even a serious argument about it. We just had our anniversary dinner. She picked the restaurant. Enzo closed his eyes, pinched the bridge of his nose. I feel like a complete idiot. Join the club. She had this whole story about an emotionally unavailable husband who made her feel invisible. Said you worked all the time, never took her anywhere, made her feel like furniture? Something twisted in my chest, because she'd thought about me enough to craft a whole story. I took her to a restaurant last night that cost me $300, I said. I take her on vacation every year. I bought her a car last spring because she said her old one made her look unsuccessful. But sure, emotionally unavailable. Yeah, well, she's good at telling people what they want to hear. That was the first true thing anyone had said about Catherine in years. So what do we do about it? Enzo asked. That was the question I'd been working on all night. The old version of me would have confronted Catherine immediately, demanded answers, probably ended up looking like the crazy jealous husband while she cried and twisted and gaslit her way out of it. I'd seen her operate that way before. When her friend accused her of spreading a rumor at a party, Catherine turned the whole thing around so thoroughly that the friend ended up apologizing. The woman could manipulate anyone. I want a divorce, I said. My lawyer said adultery could matter here. Yes, I already contacted a lawyer that morning. That if I can document it, I come out ahead in the settlement. If it's just my word against hers, she's got a 50-50 shot and a lifetime of practice making herself look like the victim. And you want my help. You've been seeing her for 6 months. You know her schedule, her lies, her patterns better than I do at this point. Help me document everything, and I'll make sure you come out of this clean. Just two guys who got played by the same woman, getting even together. Enzo thought about it, drummed his fingers on the table, looked out the window. I've got a decent job, he said finally. Good reputation. Last thing I need is being known as the guy who broke up some family man's marriage. You didn't break up anything. She did. I'm offering you a chance to be part of the solution instead of part of the problem. 10 more seconds of silence. Then he stuck out his hand. All right, I'm in. What do you need? Over the next 3 hours, fueled by bad diner coffee and worse diner food, we mapped out everything. Enzo gave me dates, times, locations, hotels they'd used, restaurants they'd visited, the apartment she'd told him was her temporary place, while the fake divorce finalized. That apartment was actually her sister Daphne's, which explained a whole lot. Daphne was Catherine's younger sister by 3 years. She'd been covering for Catherine the entire time, providing alibis and cover stories and a convenient address for extramarital activities. Every time Catherine said she was at Daphne's place, she was actually with Enzo. Every time she said Daphne needed help with something, she was actually somewhere a wife shouldn't be. Sisters working as a team to fool everyone around them. Does Daphne have a boyfriend? I asked. Yeah, some finance guy. Tyler something. She's been dating him about a year. So Tyler has no idea his girlfriend's been running cover for a cheater. No clue. Seems like a decent guy too. Met him once when he came by to pick Daphne up. I filed that information away for later. Before we left, Enzo asked me something that caught me off guard. How are you so calm about this? If I found out my wife was cheating, I'd be punching walls. I thought about it. I think I stopped being surprised by Catherine a long time ago, I said finally. This just confirmed what I already suspected, but didn't want to prove. He nodded like he understood. For what it's worth, she talked about you sometimes. Made you sound like a total loser. But sitting here across from you, I see a guy who's about to handle his business. Thanks, Enzo. Now let's figure out how to take her down. He grinned. I think I'm going to like working with you. The next 3 weeks were the most productive stretch of my life. I had 2 people helping me besides Enzo. My younger brother Sam, who worked at a law office downtown, and my buddy Ricky, who'd been my best friend since high school and was good with money. Between the 4 of us, we started building a case. Sam walked me through what I'd need for an at-fault divorce in our state, what kind of evidence mattered, how to protect my assets before filing, that sort of thing. He also connected me with a divorce attorney his office had worked with before, a woman named Margaret who had a reputation for not messing around. Ricky helped me dig through our finances. He spent a weekend going through bank statements and credit card records, looking for anything that didn't add up. What he found made me sick. Catherine had been skimming money for over a year. Small amounts, nothing that would have jumped out at me, but consistent. She'd also opened a credit card I didn't know about and run up 12 grand in charges. Hotels, restaurants, a spa weekend she told me was a work conference. All of it documented with dates that matched nights she'd supposedly been somewhere else. She wasn't even trying to hide it, Ricky said, sliding a stack of highlighted statements across my kitchen table. She just figured you'd never look. She figured right. Until now. Meanwhile, Enzo continued seeing Catherine like nothing had changed, but now every interaction was data collection. He saved every text, screenshotted every lie, documented every hotel room and dinner reservation. The voice recording was Enzo's idea. He mentioned that Catherine loved to complain about me during their dates, really get specific about how miserable her fake marriage was. So he started recording those conversations on his phone. The audio quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to hear every word she said about how predictable I was, how boring our life together had become, how she'd wasted her best years on someone who would never understand what she deserved. That recording wasn't going to help her. Ricky came through with another discovery midway through week 2. He'd traced a series of cash withdrawals that didn't match any regular expenses. Following the paper trail, he found that Catherine had been funneling money into a separate savings account under just her name for almost 2 years. Not huge amounts, maybe 5 grand total, but the pattern showed this wasn't impulsive. She wasn't just having an affair. She was building an exit strategy. She was planning to leave you anyway, Ricky explained. The affair probably sped things up, but look at these deposits. They started before she even met Enzo. She's been preparing her way out while you thought you were building a life together. That changed the whole picture. This was planned. A long-term scam that I'd been too trusting to recognize. The hardest part was acting normal at home. Every morning I woke up next to a woman who'd been sleeping with someone else for half a year. I'd lie there for a few minutes before she woke up, just looking at her face, trying to figure out where the woman I married had gone. Maybe she'd never existed. Then she'd wake up and I'd smile, and we'd have coffee together, and I'd kiss her goodbye before work. The performance wore me out. Some nights I'd sit in my truck in the driveway for 10 minutes before going inside, just to get my head right, just to put the mask back on. Then I'd remember the recordings and the texts, The way she laughed with Enzo about how easy I was to fool. And the grief would turn into something harder. Something that could wait. Her sister Daphne came over one weekend, just like Catherine had mentioned. Her boyfriend Tyler came along, a decent guy who clearly had no idea his girlfriend was a professional accomplice. I watched the sisters exchange coded looks all evening. Little signals, inside jokes. They thought they were being subtle. They weren't. Tyler and I ended up on the back porch while the sisters did whatever scheming sisters do. He worked in commercial real estate, had plans to propose to Daphne within the year. Poor guy had no clue. Had Daphne ever mentioned wanting to elope? I asked, keeping my tone casual. Catherine keeps saying her sister wants to lock things down quick. Tyler frowned. She hasn't said anything like that. We've only been together a year and change. I figured we'd take our time, do it right. Smart man. Never rush into major commitments. He smiled. That's exactly what my dad says. By the end of week 3, I had enough. A folder with photographs, recordings, bank statements, and text screenshots. Not a perfect case, but a solid one. Sam thought it was enough to file confidently. Ricky had found enough financial inconsistencies to raise serious questions. Enzo had documented enough lies to make her story fall apart. Margaret said we had a strong negotiating position, which was lawyer speak for, she's not going to like what's coming. The only question left was when and where to make my move. Catherine's parents hosted a family dinner every month at their place. Her dad, Jacob, was a retired contractor who'd always treated me like a son, more supportive than my own father had ever been. Her mom, Diane, was kind but oblivious, the type who assumed the best about everyone because it was easier than dealing with reality. The extended family rotated through these dinners, a parade of aunts and uncles and cousins who all believed Catherine was the golden child of the family. The next monthly dinner was Sunday. The timing was perfect. I called Enzo that night. How do you feel about crashing a family dinner? There was a long pause. Then he laughed. I thought you'd never ask. The week leading up to the family dinner was all about staying patient. Catherine had no idea what was coming. She spent the week complaining about her manager at work, doom-scrolling social media, and sneaking texts to Enzo whenever she thought I wasn't paying attention. I caught her smiling at her phone at least a dozen times. The strangest part was how normal everything felt on the surface. We ate dinner together, watched TV together, had conversations about groceries and utility bills, and whether we should get the gutters cleaned before fall. 6 years of marriage had built up these routines, these patterns, and they just kept running on autopilot even though the whole thing was about to blow up. Wednesday night, she told me she loved me like it was just part of the routine. I said it back because keeping the mask on was easier than starting a war early. I finalized the financial transfers on Thursday. Ricky had helped me set up a new account at a different bank, one where Catherine's name appeared nowhere. Everything I could legally move went there. Our joint account still had enough to cover bills and not raise suspicion, but the savings I'd built over 10 years of running my business, the emergency fund, the investment accounts, all of it was now protected. When Catherine eventually tried to access those funds, she'd find nothing but dust and a very unpleasant surprise. Margaret called Friday afternoon to confirm the divorce papers were ready. She walked me through the filing one more time, made sure I understood the timeline, and reminded me that the evidence we had was strong, but not guaranteed to produce any particular outcome. I picked up the papers that afternoon, held them in my hands for a long time, sitting in my truck in the parking lot outside Margaret's office. 6 years of marriage, reduced to a stack of legalese and exhibit numbers. It should have felt like failure. Instead, it just felt like the end of something that had needed to end for a long time. Sam came over that evening while Catherine was at her book club, which was actually Enzo's apartment. We sat on my back porch and reviewed the plan one final time. The timing, the sequence, the backup plans if something went sideways. You're sure about including the sister? He asked. That's going to cause a lot of collateral damage. Daphne's been lying to her own boyfriend for 6 months straight, all to help Catherine run her double life. Tyler deserves to know he's been building a future with someone who can't tell the truth. Fair point. Just making sure you've thought it through. Bro, I've thought about nothing else for 3 weeks. I know exactly what I'm doing. Sam nodded. He'd been skeptical at first, back when I'd told him about the guy at the restaurant and what I'd found on Catherine's phone. Not skeptical of the facts, just worried about me. Whether I was handling it okay, whether I was going to do something stupid. He'd relaxed once he saw how methodical I was being about the whole thing. Saturday night, Enzo and I had our final coordination meeting in a parking lot behind a grocery store. We'd gotten paranoid about texting or calling, convinced that somehow Catherine would discover our alliance. Probably unnecessary, but neither of us wanted to take chances this close to the end. You show up 30 minutes after I start, I explained, leaning against his car. I'll text you the address when I'm ready. Her dad will answer the door. By that point, I'll have already mentioned you by name. He'll let you in just to get answers. And then what? Then you tell them your side, how you met her, what she told you about me, the whole thing. Enzo was quiet for a minute. This is going to blow up her whole life. Yeah. You okay with that? I thought about it. She's been living a lie for 6 months. Probably longer based on what Ricky found. She's been taking my money, using my trust, building an exit plan, while I thought we were building a marriage. So yeah, I'm okay with it. He nodded slowly. All right then. 30 minutes after your text. Sunday morning, I woke up next to Catherine for the last time as her husband. She was sleeping peacefully, breathing steady, probably dreaming about whatever future she'd imagined with Enzo. A future that was never going to happen. I made coffee, sat on the back porch, and watched the sun come up. It was going to be a beautiful day. The family dinner was at Jacob and Diane's house, a big ranch-style home they'd owned for 30 years. Cars already lined the driveway when we arrived. Aunts, uncles, cousins, the whole crew. Catherine was in a great mood, chattering about some drama at her office, completely unaware that her own drama was about to play out in front of everyone she'd spent her life trying to impress. Inside, the house smelled like Diane's homemade bread. Hugs all around, the usual small talk about weather and traffic, and did you see the game last week? Jacob pulled me aside to ask about a plumbing issue in their rental property, and I promised to send one of my guys over Monday. Normal family stuff. Daphne arrived with Tyler about 20 minutes later. She was dressed in something expensive that Tyler had probably paid for. He shook my hand, made some joke about fantasy football, and wandered off to talk to one of Catherine's uncles about investment strategies. Genuinely nice guy. Dinner was the usual chaos. Too many conversations happening at once, people passing dishes and interrupting each other. I ate, contributed to discussions about nothing important, watching the clock on the wall tick toward 0 hour. Catherine was in perfect form that night, charming, attentive, laughing at all the right moments. She touched my arm while she spoke, complimented her mom's cooking, asked her father about his golf game, the perfect daughter, the perfect wife. After the main course, everyone migrated to the living room for coffee and Diane's legendary apple crisp. Conversation settled into the comfortable murmur of a family that spent decades in each other's company. Jacob was telling a story about a job site mishap from the 80s. Daphne was showing Tyler something on her phone, probably house listings they'd been looking at. Catherine was laughing at something her aunt said. This was my moment. I stood up and asked for everyone's attention. The room gradually quieted. All eyes turned to me. Catherine looked over with curiosity, probably expecting some kind of announcement about house renovations, or maybe a surprise trip. Her parents smiled. I need to share something with everyone, I said. Something I've discovered recently about my marriage. Catherine's smile flickered. I pulled out the folder. Started with the photographs, all from Enzo's phone and their text history. Laid them on the coffee table one by one, letting each image tell its own story. A selfie of them at a downtown restaurant, sitting close, sharing dessert. A photo outside a hotel lobby, his arm around her waist. A picture she texted him from Daphne's apartment building at 10 o'clock on a night she told me she was working late on a project deadline. These were taken over the past 6 months, I said. My voice was steady. The man in these photos is named Enzo. He's been sleeping with my wife since April. For a second, nobody moved. Then everyone moved at once. Jacob started to stand, then sat back down. Diane made a small, wounded noise. One of the aunts said, "Oh my God," loud enough that it carried across the room. Catherine shot to her feet, knocking her coffee cup off the side table, and it shattered on the floor. But nobody moved to clean it up. "This is insane," Catherine said, her voice too loud. You can't just accuse me of… I'm not accusing anyone of anything. I'm presenting documentation. I played the first recording. The room went completely silent as Catherine's voice filled it, talking about her boring husband and how easy he was to fool, and how she couldn't wait to start her real life with someone who actually appreciated her. Her own words, her own voice, broadcast to everyone she'd ever tried to deceive. When the recording ended, several people started talking at once. Jacob was asking Catherine something I couldn't make out. Diane was crying. The uncle who'd been talking about investments earlier looked like he wanted to disappear into the couch cushions. Catherine was trying to explain, her words tumbling over each other. Something about context and venting and how I was twisting things. That recording is taken out of context, she tried. I was venting to a friend about… That's when the doorbell rang. Jacob stood slowly, probably grateful for any excuse to leave the room. He walked to the front door, and when he came back 30 seconds later, Enzo was following behind him. Catherine gasped. She actually stumbled backward, nearly tripping over the edge of the rug. Everyone, I said. This is Enzo. My wife told him she was separated and filing for divorce. He had no idea she was still married until 3 weeks ago. Enzo looked uncomfortable, which made sense. A room full of strangers staring at him like he was a piece of evidence. Hey, he said. Not exactly eloquent, but what do you say in that situation? Yeah, so, your daughter told me she was basically single. Divorce was supposedly happening any day. Turns out that wasn't even close to true. Catherine turned on him, fear becoming fury. You helped him do this? You helped him humiliate me? You did this to yourself. I just kept receipts. Jacob's voice cut through everything, low and flat and dangerous. Catherine, is any of this true? She opened her mouth, closed it, opened it again. For once in her life, the words wouldn't come. There's more, I said. Daphne. Daphne's face went white. Tyler, who'd been watching the chaos unfold like a spectator at a car wreck, suddenly looked directly at his girlfriend. I pulled out the second folder. Screenshots of text conversations between the sisters. Daphne coaching Catherine on which alibis to use. Daphne confirming she'd covered when Tyler asked where she'd been. Daphne laughing about how easy it was to fool everyone. She's been covering for Catherine this entire time, I explained. Every fake alibi, every coordinated lie, every time Catherine claimed to be with her sister. Daphne backed it all up. She's been lying to you, Tyler, for 6 solid months. Tyler took the printouts, read them slowly. His face went through the same journey everyone else's had already traveled. Confusion, then understanding, then cold, quiet anger. You told me you were visiting your mother, he said to Daphne, his voice flat. You told me you had food poisoning. You told me your car broke down 3 different times. Tyler, please, let me explain. No. He handed the screenshots back to me. Don't contact me. He walked out without another word. The front door closed behind. Daphne collapsed into tears. Catherine was still frozen in the middle of the room. Their mother was sobbing into a napkin. And Jacob, the man who'd treated me like his own son for 6 years, walked over and put his hand firmly on my shoulder. What do you need from me? He asked quietly. Nothing, sir. I just needed you to know the truth before I filed. You have it. Whatever you're doing next, I support it completely. I reached into the folder one final time and pulled out the divorce papers. Walked over to Catherine, who flinched backward like I was going to hit her, and placed the documents firmly in her shaking hands. You've been served. Happy anniversary. The weeks following the family dinner were chaotic. Catherine didn't take the exposure well. Not that I expected her to. She showed up at one of my job sites the week after the dinner, stood in the parking lot screaming about how I'd humiliated her in front of everyone she loved. My guys just stood there awkwardly until she ran out of steam and drove off. Nobody knew what to say afterward. I just went back to work. She tried hitting me where she thought it had hurt, calling a couple clients and posting vague betrayal stuff online. But I'd already warned my main accounts, and the internet sympathy didn't last once her own cousin basically implied she was lying. The posts quietly disappeared, and so did her momentum. Daphne was having her own problems. Tyler had cut her off completely after walking out of that dinner. Blocked her number, blocked her on everything, told their mutual friends exactly why. Within 2 weeks, he was apparently seeing someone else, which might have been petty or might have just been how he coped. Either way, Daphne blamed Catherine for the whole thing, and Catherine blamed me, and their family dinners turned into cold silences and excuses not to show up. Jacob checked in with me a few times during those weeks, called to see how I was doing, asked if I needed anything. He apologized once, formally, for his daughter's behavior, said he'd raised her better than that, and didn't understand where things had gone wrong. I told him it wasn't his fault. Some people just turn out the way they turn out, regardless of how they were raised. He appreciated that. The divorce itself was a grind. Margaret was good at her job, but good lawyers can't make the legal system move faster than it wants to. There were filings and responses and counter-filings. Catherine's attorney tried to negotiate, then tried to stall, then seemed to accept the inevitable. The first settlement offer came about 3 weeks in. Catherine rejected it. The second offer came a month later. She rejected that too. Margaret warned me she might try to drag things out, either to punish me or hoping I'd get tired and agree to worse terms just to be done with it. But Catherine ran out of rope before I ran out of patience. Maybe her lawyer finally got through to her. Maybe she ran out of money. Either way, she signed the third offer 2 days before we were supposed to appear before a judge. The terms weren't perfect, but they were fair given the circumstances. I kept the house and the business assets. She got a settlement that was smaller than it would have been if she'd just cooperated from the start. The house was finally mine alone that weekend. It felt strange at first, being there without anyone else. The furniture was the same. The pictures on the walls, minus a few she'd taken, were the same. But the whole place felt lighter somehow, like something heavy had finally been carried out of it. Ricky and Sam helped me clean out the stuff she'd left behind. Boxes of clothes she hadn't bothered to collect. Decorations she'd picked out that I'd never really liked. Wedding photos I couldn't look at anymore. We loaded it all into a storage unit, and I told her where the key was. Not my problem after that. The first few weeks on my own were an adjustment. You build habits over 6 years with someone. You get used to another person's presence, their routines, the sound of them moving around the house. Suddenly all of that was gone, but the silence was clean. Not the heavy, suffocating quiet of living with someone you couldn't trust. Just ordinary alone, the kind that's actually peaceful once you stop fighting it. 3 months after the divorce finalized, life had settled into something almost normal. I was at a sports grill with the crew, watching a playoff game on the big screens. Enzo had become a regular by then. What started as a necessary alliance had turned into actual friendship. He got along with Sam and Ricky, and none of us felt weird about how we'd all met anymore. We were in our usual booth, wings on the table, arguing about a call the ref had blown, when Ricky elbowed me and nodded toward the door. Catherine had just walked in. She spotted me almost immediately, stood there for a second like she was working up the nerve, then started walking over. She looked rough, tired around the eyes, wearing the kind of fake confidence that fools nobody. She stopped at our table, saw Enzo sitting next to me. Her face did something complicated. "I need to talk to you." "So talk." "In private." "This is fine." She stood there, caught between leaving and saying whatever she'd come to say. The table had gone quiet. Even the game seemed to fade into background noise. "I made mistakes," she finally said. "I know that. But 6 years has to count for something. We could try again. I've been thinking about it, and I really think we could." "No. You didn't even let me finish." "Didn't need to." The answer's no. Her expression shifted. That old flash of anger I remembered from every argument we'd ever had. "You're really going to sit there with him," she gestured at Enzo, "and act like you're the victim here? Like you didn't blow up my entire life?" Enzo just shrugged. "You told me you were getting divorced. Turns out that was a lie. Seems like you blew up your own life." That was all he said. One line, delivered flat. And then he went back to his wings like she wasn't worth the effort. It hit harder than any insult could have. Catherine's voice went up. "You're all sitting here judging me? You have no idea what I went through in that marriage. You have no idea." "Ma'am." The manager had appeared out of nowhere. Big guy. Looked like he'd dealt with rowdier crowds than this one. "You're going to need to keep it down or step outside. I'm having a conversation with my—" "You're making a scene. Take it outside or I'll walk you out myself." The whole place was watching now. That specific quiet where everyone's pretending not to stare. Catherine looked around, realized she'd lost whatever audience she thought she had, and something in her just deflated. "This isn't over," she said to me, but there was nothing behind it. She turned and walked out. The manager watched her go, nodded at our table like sorry about that, and went back to work. For a few seconds, nobody said anything. Then Ricky let out a breath. "Well, that was something." "That was awkward is what it was," Sam said. "You good?" I was, actually. Seeing her like that, desperate and flailing and completely out of moves, I thought I'd feel something. Satisfaction, maybe? Or guilt? But I just felt tired of the whole thing. "Yeah, I'm good." The game came back into focus. Someone on screen made a play worth arguing about. Enzo said something about the spread. Ricky flagged down the waitress for more wings. And just like that, we were back to normal. Wings and bad calls and the kind of easy conversation you have with people who actually have your back. Catherine was probably driving home right now, replaying the whole thing in her head, figuring out who to blame. I grabbed another wing, watched the game, and didn't think about her again for the rest of the night. Guys, we are so close to hit 100,000 subscribers on this channel. If you are not subscribed to the channel, please consider subscribing. It really helps hit that 100,000 mark. Thanks for making this dream come true.
I lost everything at 19 because of my sister's lies. Dad disowned me. 10 years later, the truth came out. Mom begged for a meeting. I said never. Reddit, hello. I never imagined that I would write something like this. However, given what transpired 12 years ago, I suppose all I need to do is share it somewhere that people would genuinely pay attention. One untruth caused my family to completely erase me overnight. And now, at last, the truth was revealed. I'm not here to feel sorry for you. All I want to do is tell you how it all transpired. The night my life ended without my death, I, Hudson, a 9-year-old man, was 19. It was one of those large Saturday dinners with my family. Uncles, cousins, grandparents, the whole family. When everyone in the house was there, my parents enjoyed entertaining. When people were watching, Mom was always in her element, chatting loudly and boasting about how cohesive our family is. My brother and I moved chairs out of the garage as Dad barbecued meat outside. Then there was my adopted sister, Stella. When she was 10 years old, my parents took her in because they had always desired a female. She was immediately accepted. Shy, quiet, and courteous. I used to teach her how to ride a bike, help her with her homework, and even stand up for her when other kids made fun of her adoption. She was always just my sister to me. She was acting strangely that evening. She continued to fidget with her hands while not eating. I assumed she might be ill or simply exhausted. She abruptly got up, trembling, when everyone was in the living room after dinner and said she had something to tell them. I recall how her voice sounded. It broke as if she was going to cry. Then she said, "Hudson. He made me do it." It failed to register at all. Everybody froze. The only sound in the room was the ticking of the clock. At first, my brain didn't process it. Her meaning seemed different to me. A joke gone wrong, perhaps. Perhaps she was perplexed. Before I could say anything, my dad's hand was on me when she said, "I'm pregnant." Everything turned white as his fist struck my face with such force. My ears rang and my teeth buzzed when I hit the floor. My mother began to cry as if someone had passed away. My brother muttered as he stood there, shaking his head. "What the devil is wrong with you? Xavier? You are abhorrent." I didn't. Dad. The second hit came before I could finish, but I tried. With a fiery face and angry eyes, he shouted, "You sick bastard. This family is ashamed of you." Stella was shaking and sobbing into her mother's arms, expressing her fear. "It's okay, sweetie. You're safe now," my aunt whispered as she drew her in close. Xavier, my brother, moved forward and spat right next to my shoe. "Get out," he growled. I glanced at everyone's faces and said, "You don't deserve to breathe the same air as us. I have known them all my life." No longer did any of them see me as family. Simply repulsed. My voice broke as I said, "She's lying. She is lying. I swear on my life." Nobody gave a damn. Someone, I believe my uncle, contacted the police when my mother yelled, "Don't even say her name. Don't talk to her." I was sitting on the porch, bleeding from my mouth, when the policeman arrived. My dad nodded without looking at me when one of them inquired if I was the suspect. I wasn't even rough-cuffed by them. They could see that I was just a half-dead youngster. Even so, it seemed like being buried alive when sitting in the rear seat while the sirens were blaring. They asked me questions at the station that I could hardly comprehend. What time did it occur? What did you do that evening? Did she refuse? I kept saying that it never occurred. Not a bit. I wasn't scheduled by them. There was nothing, no proof. In the morning, they let me go. One of them uttered the word "statutory case" under his breath, as I recall. Even though Stella and I were only a year apart, 18 and 19, respectively, they still had to ask every question in the book. They examined timelines from our phones, called in a social services representative, and took statements. Ultimately, I had nothing to cling to. They cautioned me to remain available for any additional inquiries before sending me home. However, the world already knew when I went outdoors. We lived in a little town. Half of it had already found me guilty by dawn. I didn't immediately return home. I kept walking till my legs failed me. All of my belongings were stacked on the front lawn when I eventually returned. School books, clothes, and even my backpack. Like a guard, my dad stood by the door. "Leave," he said. This time, there was no anger in his voice. Simply cold. "You're finished here. Please, Dad. You are familiar with me." "Never would I. Don't refer to me that way. You are no longer my son." I reached through the doorway for my mother. She clutched Stella as if she were a crime scene victim and turned her face away. Behind them, Xavier slammed the door. I remained motionless. I could hardly pick up my luggage since my hands were trembling so much. My phone buzzed that evening. My girlfriend Aurora was there. We had been dating for a year. She was the one who knew me the best. She sobbed as she whispered, "Jack, I trust you. I promise that I do. However, my parents won't allow me to speak with you. They believe it to be true. They threatened to call the police if I ever saw you again. Don't do this. Please." She cried as I spoke. "I apologize. I am unable to lose them." She hung up after that. The phone screen went blank while I was staring at it. I never heard her voice again after that. For the remainder of the night, I sat in my car behind a gas station 3 towns away. I saw the rain streak down in crooked lines as I gazed at the damaged windshield. I had gone from being a typical child with a family, a girlfriend, and a future to being viewed by everyone as a criminal in less than 12 hours. I assumed it was my dad's truck every time headlights went by. I was afraid he would pull me back to complete the task he started, but nobody showed up. I glanced at myself in the rearview mirror, when the sun finally rose. I had bruises on my face. There was still blood on my clothes. And I came to a straightforward but decisive realization. I had no one to save me. That's when it dawned on me. I hadn't been expelled by my family. I was erased. That thought weighed heavily on my chest. I had neither a plan nor a map as I drove into the night. All I had in my wallet was $math BBS $250, a rucksack, and the clothes on my back. I continued to drive until the gas light turned red. I didn't care where I was. The engine coughed close to a sign that read, "Welcome to Maplewood." I parked in a spot behind a line of establishments that appeared to be partially deserted. My hands were trembling from cold and hunger. For days, I had been subsisting on vending machine chips. Across the street, a diner window had a help wanted sign affixed to it. I tried to summon the bravery to enter as I stood there looking at it. When I walked in, the bell above the door jingled. Behind the counter was a man with deep creases in his face, big shoulders, and a gray beard. With a gravel-like voice, he asked, "Can I help you?" I said, "I saw the sign. I am capable of doing dishwashing." "Really? Do anything. He examined me. I had wrinkles in my clothes. The roadside muck was still on my sneakers. Have you ever held a kitchen job? No. Sir. He gave a grunt. You appear to be hungry. I'm all right. I said a falsehood. With a groan, he nodded in the rear. Jude is his name. There are sinks. You begin now. After your shift, you are given a supper. That was all. Just work. No paperwork. No questions. The kitchen was hot, noisy, and cramped. Until my hands were raw, I scrubbed pots and dishes. Jude offered me a half-eaten burger and fries from a client who didn't finish as my first meal. I didn't give a damn. Like I hadn't eaten in weeks, I gobbled it up. I attempted to return the plate to him at closing time, stating that I would find a place to sleep. It was the first act of compassion I had experienced in weeks when Jude cleaned his hands and added, "There's a room upstairs. Ain't pretty, but it's got a bed and a lock. You can work it off." Although the room was tiny, perhaps 12 feet across with a soiled mattress, a flickering light bulb, and peeling wallpaper from the corners, it had a roof and the floor remained stationary. I passed out on the bed and slept for 14 hours in a row. I developed a rhythm over the course of the following few days. Jude grunted, "Good job." His comments meant more to me than any apology I had ever received, but he didn't say much else. Jude was reading the newspaper at the counter when I walked downstairs to lock up one evening, maybe 3 weeks in. "Kid, what's your story?" he asked, looking up at me, and I froze. "What do you mean?" "Got a customer in here today. Some trucker passing through. Said he saw your picture in a paper a couple towns over. Some family thing." My stomach sank. I began to tremble. "It doesn't appear that way. It's untrue. My adopted sister. My sibling. She invented it." Jude never lifted a hand, I promise. "Calm down, child. What people say doesn't matter to me." I gave him a blink. "You don't?" He reclined on the stool. "Everyone has a story to tell. You're working here. That's what counts. Rebuild your life, keep your head down, and do your job. The rest will work itself out." It took a moment for those words to register. I didn't felt like a monster for the first time since that evening. I sat on the side of the bed that night and stared at the cracked wall, trying to take it all in. Jude gave me a chance even though he didn't know me. That's not something my own family could do. I was using my phone's contact list one evening. I needed to hear my mother's voice, but I was hesitant to phone home. Perhaps enough time had gone by. Perhaps they had come to the realization. On the third ring, she answered, silently, "Mom, it's me," I said. "Quiet. Hudson?" "Yeah, I just wanted you to know I'm okay. I found a job." Don't call here again," she said. Her voice broke. She hung up after saying, "Your father doesn't even want your name spoken in this house." I kept my eyes on the phone until the screen went dark. I never tried again after that. Months passed after weeks. I saved what little I could, while working double shifts. Jude began to teach me little lessons. How to check a thermostat, patch a vent, and repair a leaky pipe. "Child, learn to fix things." He would argue it's the only way to survive. Curiosity got the better of me one evening after closing. I looked up Stella's name. My mother stood proudly next to her, holding a cake shaped like a baby carriage, and there she was, grinning in photos, her tummy round, surrounded by family, and clutching pink balloons that said, "It's a girl." In the corner of the picture, my brother was grinning as if nothing had happened. My throat ached. I had to shut down the laptop because my stomach was so upset. I then made the decision that I would never again be Hudson Winter. Something in me turned off after that night. Give up, attempting to explain. Don't wait for someone to approach you. The version of myself they buried was over. At the diner, I poured myself into my work. I would arrive before the sun came up, and go long after it closed. I learned how to change the filters in the ancient air vents, cleaned grease traps, and replaced leaking faucets. Jude saw. He asked, You ever thought about learning this stuff for real? That's Ludfon. As I was unclogging the sink one afternoon with half of my arm down the drain, I looked up in confusion. Similar to plumbing? He laughed. No, larger. HVAC, air systems, heating, and cooling. Kids, people are always in need of heat or cold. That ability keeps you going indefinitely. I remembered the way he said it. I was sick of cleaning dishes. I was looking for something that would last and be irreplaceable. Jude gave me a leaflet from the community college across the highway a few weeks later. He said, "Night classes," and slid it over the counter. I looked at the document for a while before saying, "You'd be good at it. You pay what you can. I'll cover the rest until you're on your feet." I had never before received such an offer of assistance. Not even my actual family. The next day, I registered. The initial months were harsh. After working 12-hour shifts at the diner, I would take the bus to night school and struggle to remain awake while listening to lectures about coils and compressors. I felt as though I was mending myself piece by piece every time I fixed something, when chilly air emerged from a vent, or when a broken item roared back to life. Jude continued to shove me. He said, "Don't just get good. They can't ignore you if you get so good." I had completed half of the HVAC program by the time I received my GED. On the side, I began performing little repairs. Jude's home, the vents in the diner, and a few frequent patrons. Jude hung the certificate in the diner's doorway as if it were his own child's diploma when it arrived in the mail. "Not bad for a runaway," he added, giving me a shoulder pat. Even if hearing that term still hurt, I laughed. I saved enough money with Jude's assistance to purchase a used pickup and some used tools. I left the diner to take a full-time job at a nearby HVAC firm. Derek, a co-worker, was accused of taking money from a client's kitchen counter one summer afternoon. The supervisor was prepared to terminate him immediately. I intervened because of Derek's expression, which was the identical panic I had seen in the mirror 12 years prior. "Check the vent," I suggested. Everyone looked at me. After climbing up and removing the cover, I saw that the envelope had been drawn halfway into the duct by the return air. Most likely, the client placed it too near the vent. Derek nearly burst into tears. The client received an apology from the boss. Derek then shook my hand as if I had just saved his life. Jude called me that evening after learning about it from a source. "Good job, kid," he remarked. "You cleaned up a mess. Not simply air. That's what makes men different from mechanics." I found that to be quite memorable. That's how the years went by. Work, rest, eat, and then work some more. It was safe, easy, and predictable. But occasionally, when I returned home at night, I would feel as though there was a whole other life still buried somewhere within of me. I opened an old account that I hadn't touched in years one evening while preparing invoices. When I opened social media, my hands trembled. I ought not to have done it. My family and her daughter, who appeared to be around 12, were standing in front of a birthday cake, grinning and laughing. My dad's arm wrapped over them as if nothing had occurred, and my mother was there to embrace her. In the background, my brother is smiling, as if he never spat at my feet. I went through the pictures until my chest ached, reading the caption, "Happy birthday to our miracle girl. Family is everything. Family." And appeared content, glowing, and as though they had never destroyed anyone's life. I shut down the laptop and sat trembling in the dark. I had envisioned them disintegrating without me for years. However, they didn't. They simply took my place. After my shift that evening, I sat in my truck in the parking lot and decided what to do. After returning home, I erased all previous accounts and any mention of the name Winter. Like severing a loose cable, I sever my connections to the past. I submitted the paperwork for a formal name change, Hudson Winter, by morning. Before all of this, the only person who ever truly shown me kindness was my grandmother, whose maiden name it was. Weeks later, the new ID arrived, and I gazed at it for a while. In some way, the image had changed. It was no longer a boy, and it appeared tougher and harder. On that day, I began creating something they could never destroy and stopped fleeing from what they had done to me. 12 years later, Winter Heating and Air was my own business. Just a few vans, 4 workers, and a consistent roster of clients who have faith in my abilities. We were dependable, but we weren't elegant. At last, life had reached a level. Early summer was when things started to fall apart once more. Sweat was streaming down my back as I worked on an ancient air unit behind a bakery when my phone began to vibrate constantly in my pocket. Hometown area code, unknown number. Twice, I disregarded it. On the third occasion, it continued. After wiping my hands, I replied, "Yeah, this is Winter." After a little period of stillness, I heard a voice I hadn't heard in more than 10 years. "Hudson." My chest constricted. "Who's this?" "I'm Aurora." For a moment, I froze. Everything in my immediate vicinity. The sounds of the street and the fan vanished. "How did you, Aurora?" She let out a sigh. "I thought you should hear this from someone who genuinely believes you, even though I know I shouldn't call." Just that words caused my throat to tighten. She went on. "Stella has been taken into custody." I blinked. For what reason was he arrested? She accused him of lying. For accusing another man in the same manner that she accused you. Feeling lightheaded, I leaned against the van. She what? This time, the man she accused retaliated. He hired an attorney. Everything. It turns out that she fabricated the entire tale once more. She also admitted to the first one to you throughout the investigation. She also claimed to have lied in the past. The words struck with the force of a sledgehammer. For years, I had dreamed of hearing something similar, but it didn't seem that way. There was only quiet, not relief. Aurora's voice trembled as she continued. She informed the police that she became pregnant following a one-night encounter with Asher, a local heroin dealer. When she told him, he vanished. Because you were present and everyone trusted her, she became frightened and accused you. They cleansed your name, Hudson. I was officially unable to talk. The phone made my hand go numb. She paused. "I simply felt that you ought to be aware. I apologize for the delay." I finally said in a hushed voice. "Thank you." She muttered. "I'm married now, kids, but I never forgot what they did to you." I gave her a small smile, but she was unable to see it. "Aurora, you were the only one who trusted me. That doesn't have to make you feel horrible." We continued our awkward but gentle conversation for another minute. She then bid me farewell, and that was it. After that, I spent over an hour sitting in the van and gazing at the steering wheel. I couldn't decide whether to laugh, cry, or shout. It was 12 years too late, yet my name was cleared. The call began in the morning. Emails come after private numbers. One time, my curiosity got the better of me and I received a message on my work email with the subject line, "Please call us back." I responded to an unknown number. "Hudson," murmured a tremulous voice. My mother said, "I recognized that voice right away." "Quickly, don't hang up, please," she pleaded. Stella filled the police in on everything. I hung up, saying, "We didn't know." They were unaware. They had no interest in finding out. A local newspaper requested a statement later that week. I remained silent. I had no desire in sympathy or publicity. I was hoping for something better. Quiet. However, silence was short-lived. The next email I received was from my brother, who said he hoped we could start over because he had been foolish and young. A voicemail was left by my dad. "Son, all we want is to see you." We erred. Errors. Forgetting someone's birthday is an example of a number blunder. Their actions were a decision, so I wrote letters rather of responding. Not the kind they anticipated. No pity, no gentle words, only the facts. I told them about all the nights I slept, shivering, in my car. Regarding the moldy space over the dining area. About Jude, the stranger who took me in after I was rejected by my own family. Their names made me nauseous. So I told them how it felt to burn my school ID. How I felt as I was cleaning grease pans for scraps, and saw pictures of them, grinning around Stella and her daughter. They didn't only destroy my reputation, I told them. My house, my confidence, and any remaining tranquility were all destroyed by them. I always ended my letters in the same manner. The truth was not believed by you. You can now accept it. I never sent them by mail. I just placed the letters in my desk drawer after stacking them in a shoebox. As I sat in my workshop that evening checking over bills, I took in my surroundings, the tools, the trucks, the company name painted on the walls, all of which I had constructed myself. I had lost everything, and it was gone forever. However, I couldn't lose what I had created. I felt not erased for the first time in years. Once more, I felt written. By me, not by them. However, tranquility doesn't last forever. The same individuals who had thrown me aside suddenly recalled that I existed after word got out about Stella. One afternoon, there was a knock on the door of my office. I heard my name called while I was repairing a thermostat unit on my desk. Hudson. I froze. My mother was there when I turned. She appeared older and smaller, like if someone had taken the life out of her. Her hands were trembling, as she held a foil-covered casserole dish, and her hair was gray at the roots. I made your favorite, she whispered. I was immobile for a moment. Chicken and rice. You used to love it. My stomach turned when I smelled it. I recalled the last time Mom had prepared it. The night before it all went haywire. I slowly got to my feet. Why are you here? Her eyes welled with tears. I leaned against the counter and said, I just want to see you to say sorry. We were wrong. Stella lied. We know that now. She dried her nose and said, You're 12 years too late. She was crying, and your father said, I didn't know what to believe back then. I interrupted her. You didn't even ask me. You didn't let me speak. You kicked me out and told me never to call again. She came closer. Please, Hudson. I yelled. Don't call me that. She recoiled when the words struck her like a physical blow. You lost that right. I gestured toward the door. She put the casserole on the counter and paused before saying, You should go. I looked at it and said, At least eat this, please. Throw it out when you leave. I felt nothing as the door shut behind her. Not sadness, not rage, just nothing. My dad arrived 2 days later. He was waiting outside the office, resting against his truck as if he owned the place, while I was out on a service call. He grinned as if our disagreement had just occurred years ago. Hey, son, I said without responding. He added, You've done good for yourself, as he glanced about. Business, trucks, employees. I'm proud of you. I told him to get to the point. His jaw moved. Your mother's not doing great. She cries every day. I figured maybe if we all sat down, cleared the air. I nearly burst out laughing. Cleared the air? You beat me and threw me out. You left me homeless. You cleared the air that night when you told me I wasn't your son. He let out a disappointed groan. I was angry. You have to understand it was a different time. Things looked bad. So, you hit first. Asked questions. Never. His expression grew tense. You don't have to keep holding on to hate, son. Now then. I'm not holding on to hate, I declared as I took out my phone. I'm holding on to self-respect. He scowled. What are you? I hit a button. Security. I've got someone trespassing at the front. Big guy in a red jacket. His face transformed in an instant. You're calling security on your own father? When I said, You're not my father, you're a stranger who ruined my life. A few minutes later, the security officer from the adjoining building approached and requested that he leave. Dad drove to his truck, slammed the door, and drove out of the lot while muttering obscenities. I merely sat at my desk and stared at the same location where he had stood when the stillness returned. Meanwhile, I received tidbits of gossip from former acquaintances. My family was disintegrating. Dad had screamed at a supervisor at the plant, which cost him his job. There were rumors that he almost got arrested for it. Mom hardly left the house. She was unwell and no longer herself, according to her neighbors. After learning of what had transpired years prior, my brother's wife had taken their children and moved in with her parents. All of the illusions they had created about being the ideal family were crumbling. It's often said that karma takes time. It arrived exactly on time, in my opinion. Kevin, one of my employees, arrived at the workplace one afternoon carrying a tiny box. "Hey boss, this was sitting outside the door," he said. There were dozens of letters inside, each with my name, Hudson Winter, scribbled in a weak hand. There is no return address. I knew who they were from, without even opening them. My mother's handwriting had always been dramatic. I went away after carrying the box into the back room and placing it on a shelf above the storage bins. I sat in my office that evening and glanced up at the window that held those letters. I considered every word that was written, including perhaps Bible passages about forgiveness, excuses, and apologies. For those who didn't spend nights in their car wondering why no one believed them, however, forgiving is a luxury. Closure was not what I wanted. I desired separation. I therefore kept the letters sealed. Each and every last one. I locked them up in that box. Because forgiveness made them feel better, they desired it. Not because they were deserving of it. They had no desire for me. They want atonement. I also refused to give it to them. I whispered to myself as I gazed up at the sky. I was once obliterated. I now permanently removed them. I assumed that was the end of it. The conclusion. However, the past always finds a way to slip through the crevices. I received the letter 3 months later. No return address, plain white envelope. There was only one page of paper inside. "Stella Winter has asked to meet with you in the Maple Ridge Correctional Facility." I just stared at it for a long time. On paper, her name seemed incorrect, as if it had lost its place in my life. I put it in the garbage, took it out, and then threw it away once more. However, the idea persisted. I had been imagining what I would say to her if I ever met her again for 12 years. Perhaps it was time to find out. I therefore took a car to the prison a week later. It was in the middle of nowhere and 2 hours distant. I was brought into a gray visiting room that smelled like stale coffee and disinfectant after the front desk guard scanned my ID and buzzed me through. With my palms flat on the table, I took a seat at a metal table. Around me, others spoke softly. Parents, spouses, and children all went to see those they still cared about. I wasn't among them. Then she entered. She was hardly recognizable to me. She appeared slimmer and almost frail. Her face looked wrinkled and exhausted, her hair was pushed back tightly, and her skin was pale. The girl who used to cry in front of our family, gripping her stomach and calling me a monster, suddenly appeared to be a ghost. Her eyes flicked up briefly before dropping to the table as she took a seat across from me. "Thank you for coming," she whispered. She curled her hands in her lap and said. I didn't answer. She said, "You look different," after a brief pause. "Older. You look guilty," I remarked. In an instant, her eyes flooded. "I deserve that." "No," I quietly said. "You deserve worse." She nodded slowly, her eyes starting to well up with tears. "I know, and I'm sorry. For everything. For lying. For ruining your life. For all of it." "Why?" I inquired. I spoke in a steady, low voice. "Why me?" Her voice trembled as she looked down. "Because you were safe to blame. You were quiet. You never fought anyone. I knew everyone would believe me because you were, you know, the good one, the easy one. And I panicked." I bent over. "You panicked. So you destroyed my life. You panicked. So you made your own brother the villain?" Her shoulders trembled. "I didn't think it would go that far. I thought maybe you'd just deny it and people would forget and I'd get sympathy until I figured something out." "Sympathy," I said again. "You got that? You got a house full of people loving you, protecting you, throwing parties for you while I slept in a car behind a gas station." She put her hands over her eyes. I know what I did, Asher." She stopped, gasping for air. "Asher was the guy who really got me pregnant. He was a dealer. I slept with him once. When I told him I was pregnant, he laughed. Said I was crazy. Said if I told anyone, he'd disappear. And he did. I didn't know what to do. So, I blamed you because you were there. I simply gazed at her. I was no longer even angry. Simply hollow. You ruined my life. I muttered. Do you know that you stole everything from me? My family. My girlfriend. My name. You made me into a monster. You made me afraid to trust anyone again. She was using her sleeve to wipe her nose while crying. In a whisper, she said, I've thought about you every day in here. I hate myself for it. I can't sleep. Every time I close my eyes, I see your face from that night. Good, I responded bluntly. You should see it. You should never stop seeing it. Desperate, she looked up at that moment. There's something else. My daughter, they never told her the truth. Stella responded, Mom said it would confuse her to change the story. So, she still thinks it's you. Even when everything was revealed, I just stared at her in disbelief. She gave a feeble nod. They said she's too young to understand and that admitting they were wrong would just open old wounds. They'd rather keep the lie than face what they did. She asks about you sometimes. Stella claimed to have seen your picture. Old ones from before everything. She is curious as to why you never showed up. She said, that hit harder than anything else. The identical falsehood that ruined me was being believed by a child elsewhere. Not mine. My chair scraped the floor as I got to my feet. A few people looked around. You don't get to tell me that, I said. You don't get to throw that on me now, like it's something I can fix. Trembling, she extended a hand. I'm sorry, Hudson. I really am. I can't undo it. I just needed you to know. I felt nothing as I gazed at her. Nothing but the end of something, neither relief nor closure. You took 12 years from me, I said. She was sobbing uncontrollably and choked on her words when she said, I hope you never sleep peacefully again. I deserve it, she declared. All of it. I lowered myself a little and gave her a final look. You do. After that, I turned and left. The guards buzzed the door open without a word. Staring at the fence ahead, I climbed into my truck and sat with my hands on the wheel. After seeing her, I imagined I would feel liberated, like if I had somehow triumphed. However, I didn't. In it, there was no triumph. Just tiredness. When the truth eventually comes out, some things don't get better. When you stop caring, certain things continue to be cracked. However, I became aware of something when I turned on the motor and started to drive away. Not forgiving, not blowing up, just walking away. That had strength of its own. I felt not erased for the first time. I was satisfied. After that visit to the penitentiary, a year went by, and things finally began to make sense. I purchased a new, respectable home just outside of the city after selling my old, tiny one. It had a gated yard, 3 bedrooms, and nothing extravagant, but it was mine. I paid for every wall and nail with my own hard effort. Quinn was another. She was introduced to me by one of my clients. She arrived to revamp the company's logo as a graphic designer. She had this calmness about her, but I didn't intend to date anyone. We had been dating for a year when she commented, whatever it was, you're not that guy anymore. She didn't probe too much about my background. I adopted a rescue dog named Max, and she moved in with her cat. The house felt alive for the first time between the 3 of us. Peace. Max. Quinn. And work. An envelope without a return address then arrived in the mail one morning. My stomach constricted. When I opened it, the name inside stopped me in my tracks, even though I had assumed it may be another apology from my family. Hunt, Lucas. Stella had accused a second man. His writing style was concise, crisp, and direct. Mr. Winner, I'm filing a civil case against Stella for defamation and emotional damage. You deserve that justice, too. My lawyer says your testimony would help both of us. If you're interested, call me. I read it twice. That afternoon, I gave him a call. The following day, we met at a coffee shop. He was perhaps a few years older than myself. He shook my hand as if we had been friends for ages. Feels weird, doesn't it? Number 4, he asked, feeling a connection that was upsetting to both of us. We talked about everything for an hour. Yeah, I replied, but I guess we both survived it. I didn't think twice when he asked whether I wanted to join the lawsuit. I'm in, I declared. Months passed during the case, but this time I wasn't hiding or running. I appeared in court, took a seat across from Stella, and spoke the truth in a cool, collected manner. When I spoke, I didn't even glance at them. The attorneys explained everything. The deception, the emotional harm, the bogus allegations, and the evidence that she had done it twice. The courtroom fell hushed as the judge's decision was made. I felt lighter than ever when I left the courthouse. Officially, I had a spotless reputation. However, it went beyond that. I felt as though a ghost had at last ceased to pursue me. My name wasn't buried in shame for once. It was next to phrases like vindication, justice, and truth. The voicemail then arrived. It was getting close to midnight. My phone buzzed while I was completing bills in my workplace. Hometown area code, unknown number. I was on the verge of ignoring it, but something forced me to listen when it went to voicemail. Your mother found this number online, son. I'm not sure if it's still correct. The message concluded with a long pause and a trembling breath. I don't have much time. The doctors say it's cancer. Stage 4. I don't want anything. I swear. I just want to see you one last time before it's too late. Please, I'm sorry. I was wrong. Please. Son. I sat there looking at the phone for a minute. I then pressed play once more. I then removed it. Not out of rage, not out of retaliation, simply nothing. I recalled the evening he struck me. The expression in his eyes when he informed me that I was no longer his son. I recalled tasting rain and blood while I slept in my car behind the gas station. He made the decision to be honest. I was now selecting I muttered to myself. They threw me out into the cold ones. Now I fix other people's air. That's irony, I guess. And peace. They erased me once, but I rebuilt myself. And this time, my story ends on my terms. Steady, quiet, and always north. My nephew tried to steal 6 restaurants after my brother's death, forged papers, poisoned smoothies, life without parole. Frank Gallagher is my name. My age is 66. Additionally, I witnessed the removal of my younger brother's casket from Boston Street, Joseph's Cathedral last Monday by 6 men dressed in dark suits. My nephew Dylan Hayes, whose cologne was so potent that it sliced through the incense, appeared at my elbow while the organ was still playing. Uncle Tom, you've got 96 hours to sign over the restaurants. After that, I'm filing a lawsuit that'll destroy you. He leaned in close, his breath hot against my ear, and whispered, Uncle Tom. He smiled, but it wasn't the grave smile you'd expect at a funeral. No, this was the smile of someone who had been anticipating and preparing for this moment. Neither my voice nor my hands trembled. I just turned to face him. I said, all right, Dylan. Thursday at noon, your lawyer's office. The 41-year-old man in his 1000 suit paused for a moment before his smile returned. He had anticipated tears. He had anticipated me pleading with him, reminding him that I had known him since the day he was born and that I had covered his college expenses when his father, my brother Patrick Gallagher, was too arrogant to seek assistance. Instead, I simply nodded to him quietly and left my brother's grave. As I climbed into my old Honda Civic, I could feel Dylan's gaze on my back. I caught a glimpse of him and his expectant spouse, Brooke Whitman, in the rearview mirror. They both appear perplexed. They believed they had won the lotto. With 6 locations throughout Boston, Gallagher's restaurant group has a net worth of more than $9.5 million. They were unaware of what was about to happen. Please let me know where you're watching from in the comments section before I reveal how I exposed his lies and discovered something much more sinister than greed. Additionally, please like and subscribe to this channel if you think that patience always triumphs over arrogance. Patrick Gallagher, my brother, was 61 years old. He had been battling what the doctors referred to as early onset Alzheimer's for the previous 4 years. It began modestly, with misplaced keys and forgotten names. However, he rapidly declined 8 months ago. He was unable to recall the recipe for tomato sauce that our mother had taught us in her Sui kitchen. Driving to the restaurants where he had worked for 33 years, he would get lost. Then he passed out in his apartment 4 weeks ago. Massive stroke, the doctor said. Before the ambulance could reach him, he passed away. I thought so. Because of his illness and confusion, Patrick had been under a lot of stress. Dylan, his son, is always pressuring him to retire so that the next generation can take over. It was logical. What surprised me was Dylan's poise and assurance at the funeral, as if he had been practicing a speech for the reception at our flagship restaurant on Newbury Street, which Patrick and I had co-founded in 1994. Dylan seemed to own the crowd as he moved through it. He shook hands with our suppliers, assured Rosa DeLuca, our head chef, that everything would go on as usual, and humbly accepted condolences. I observed him. You learn to read people after 37 years in the restaurant industry. You learn to identify the vendors who dilute their goods, the staff members who rob the register, and the customers who will leave without paying. Dylan's sorrow appeared practiced. He would check his phone every few minutes, type a few words quickly, and then turn to face the door as if he were expecting a significant other. Dylan cornered me in the upstairs office, where Patrick and I used to count the night's receipts, celebrate our first profitable year, and toast with cheap whiskey when we opened our second location, after the last visitor had left and Rosa and her team had cleaned up and gone home. Tom, Dylan said. Uncle Tom is no more. It had been nearly a year since he had called me that. We must talk about the business scenario. Business circumstance? After a day of hurried conversations and vacuous condolences, I repeated, my voice rough. On the desk, he set a leather portfolio. There were numerous documents inside, all marked with yellow tabs. When Dad's mind was still somewhat clear, he signed these 8 months ago. A power of attorney. He wanted all business decisions to be made by me. You are aware of his confusion. I examined the documents. Every page had my brother's signature at the bottom. However, something didn't feel right. Patrick had never been good at writing by hand. Only he could read the scrawl of a doctor. However, these signatures were overly controlled and tidy, practiced. Whispering, Patrick never mentioned this to me, I said. Dylan's mouth clenched. Let's face it, Uncle Tom, Dad no longer trusted your judgment. You're stuck in the past. You wouldn't let us grow into delivery apps. I had received offers, including one from a corporate chain offering $14 million for the entire operation. Patrick and I had laughed about it over beers. We're not selling our mother's recipes to some corporation that'll turn them into frozen meals, he had said. He wouldn't update the menus or even consider selling to one of the restaurant groups that had been calling for years. As Dylan went on, reclining in the leather chair that had once belonged to Patrick, the truth is that Dad left me in charge. These documents are legal and binding. You own 35%, I own 65%, and I'm making some changes. First, we're bringing in new management. Second, we're hiring a consulting firm to audit everything. Dylan slid another document across the desk and said, you have 96 hours to sign the transition documents. If you don't, my lawyer will file a suit for breach of fiduciary duty, mismanagement, and embezzlement. Third, you're stepping down as operating partner 35%. Patrick and I had always been 50/50 partners, splitting everything down the middle for 34 years. Large cash withdrawals, mysterious expenses, and embezzlement, the word hit like a slap. I had never stolen a dime. All cash withdrawals were recorded. There were also legitimate payments to day laborers and tips for suppliers, the kind of underhanded business dealings that kept a restaurant afloat in a city like Boston. I said, keeping my voice level, I'll need to speak with my attorney. Dylan got up and buttoned his suit jacket. You do that, but Tom, think carefully. You're 66 years old. Do you really want to spend your retirement in court? Or worse? He left the threat hanging. Sign the papers. Take your 35% and enjoy your golden years. Fight me, and I'll make sure you end up with nothing. I sat by myself in the office, surrounded by pictures of Patrick and me over the years. Opening day 1994. Our parents cutting the ribbon. Patrick smiling with tomato sauce on his apron. Us with our arms around each other's shoulders. I heard his BMW start in the parking lot. I heard the pricey engine purr as he drove away. After waiting until the building was completely quiet, I opened the desk's bottom drawer, which I kept locked, and took out a business card that I had been hoarding for 5 months. It was a card left for me by a former customer who had been dining at our restaurant every Friday night for 5 years. Veronica Hale is a lawyer who specializes in corporate litigation and fraud investigation. I picked up my phone and dialed, and on the second ring, her secretary answered. Hale and Associates. This is Frank Gallagher. Veronica told me to call if I ever needed help. The secretary's voice warmed up right away. Gallagher, Miss Hale has been anticipating your call. She asked me to let you know that she has cleared her schedule. Would you be able to visit her office tomorrow morning at 8:30? At 8:30 the following morning, I was sitting in Veronica Hale's corner office overlooking Boston Harbor. She was a woman in her 50s with sharp eyes behind designer glasses, the kind of attorney who could make the opposing counsel uneasy simply by entering a courtroom. She poured coffee from a French press, the real stuff, dark and strong. Tom, I'm sorry about Patrick. He was a good man. Thank you. Tell me everything, I told her. We'd spoken many times over her Friday night dinners, always about food, family, and Boston's evolving restaurant scene. I'd never asked what kind of law she practiced, but now I knew. When I was done, Veronica sat back in her chair. You said that the signature on those power of attorney documents looked wrong, too neat. Patrick's handwriting was terrible. Veronica took notes, her pen moving quickly across a yellow legal pad. Dylan's threats, the power of attorney, the accusations of embezzlement. Veronica took out her phone and called Ethan, saying, I need you in my office. Bring your forensic kit. She hung up and turned to face me, asking, Do you have copies of those documents, Tom? I took out my phone and showed her the pictures I had taken the previous evening with trembling hands. 5 minutes later, a young man in his 30s came into the office with a laptop and a small case, and Veronica introduced him as Ethan Park, forensic document examiner. Look at these signatures. Compare them to these, she said, pulling out a file folder that contained documents I recognized, vendor contracts and lease agreements that Patrick had signed over the years. See how the pen pressure is consistent throughout? That's consistent with tracing. Ethan set up his laptop, uploaded my photos, and started comparing them side by side. He zoomed in, examined the ink flow, and analyzed pen pressure. After 10 minutes, he looked up. These power of attorney signatures are fakes. Someone traced these from older signatures, probably from documents that predate his illness. He gestured to the screen. These documents completely lack the tremor that was developing in Patrick Gallagher's later signatures, consistent with his neurological condition. Veronica grinned, but it wasn't a pleasant smile. Those documents Dylan showed you are worthless, but that's not the interesting part. What do you mean? Dylan doesn't really know what he's trying to steal. She pulled out another file, this one much thicker. Do you remember when Patrick set up the corporation? When you two decided to protect yourselves from lawsuits? I nodded. That was the smile of a lawyer who had just discovered the weakness in an opponent's armor. According to Veronica, your lawyer at the time was very intelligent. He not only set up an LLC but also a number of holding companies and a family trust. Gallagher's restaurant group isn't owned by you and Patrick. That was in 2001, after a customer attempted to sue us for a slip and fall. Our lawyer had advised incorporating and creating an LLC. Veronica went on. You, Patrick, and your mother, Evelyn, do you remember signing those papers? It's owned by the Gallagher Family Trust, which is governed by a board of 3 trustees. I thought my bewilderment must have shown on my face. I answered incoherently. At the time, it had sounded like legalese. When Patrick passes away, his trustee position passes to his estate, which means it goes into probate. Your mother is still alive, Tom. She is still living in that assisted care facility in Quincy, still legally competent, and the trust documents state that no significant decisions can be made without the unanimous consent of all 3 trustees. Exactly. And there's more. Veronica produced another document. The trust also owns the real estate. The building on Newbury Street. You and Patrick didn't just lease it. Dylan doesn't automatically inherit anything, so he can't sell the restaurants, fire me, or do anything else without my mother's approval. I sat back feeling like I could breathe for the first time in 2 days. You bought it in 2006, and it's now worth about $4.8 million. The building in Cambridge where your second location is located is worth another $3.6 million. Dylan believes he's stealing a restaurant, but he has no idea that he's trying to steal a real estate empire. We go to court, show that the signatures are fake, and Dylan leaves with nothing. Veronica's face darkened. Tom, if Dylan is willing to falsify legal documents and threaten you with false charges of embezzlement, what else might he have done? What are you suggesting? Patrick's rapid decline over the past 8 months. Have you ever asked yourself if it was really natural? The room felt cold. I told the medical examiner that my brother, my younger brother, who I had taught to cook, shielded from bullies in elementary school, and who had been my best friend for 61 years, had suffered a stroke, but even my own voice sounded far away. Medical examiners make preliminary decisions based on clear evidence. Veronica leaned forward. I have a friend at the DA's office. If you're willing, I can make a call. Tom, Patrick, was 61, and despite having Alzheimer's, he was generally healthy. He had a complete physical 8 months prior, with the exception of cognitive problems, and then he quickly deteriorated and passed away from a massive stroke. The next 4 days were the longest of my life. I went to restaurants and maintained appearances while requesting a complete toxicology analysis, and asking some questions that perhaps should have been asked the first time. Do it, I said, my words coming out harder than I intended. If Dylan did something to Patrick, if he hurt my brother, I want to know. Veronica made the call. On Wednesday, Dylan arrived at the Newbury Street location, strutting around as if he owned the place, telling the staff about the exciting changes that were coming, and introducing his wife, 5-year-old Brooke, who was 8 months pregnant and looked like she was constantly checking her phone, as the new director of operations. We're going to modernize everything, Brooke told Rosa, our head chef who had been with us for 18 years, updating the menu, bringing in some molecular gastronomy elements, maybe some fusion concepts. Rosa, a 62-year-old Sicilian woman who had learned to cook from her grandmother, just stared at Brooke as if she had suggested setting the kitchen on fire. She had been a pharmaceutical sales representative when she first met Dylan and was now apparently qualified to run a restaurant empire. Dylan called Uncle Tom, my lawyer's office, on Thursday at 11:45. It is noon. Avoid being late. I've already arrived. I told a lie. I'll see you shortly. His lawyer's office was not where I was. I was in the conference room with Veronica Hale, Ethan Park, 2 DA's office investigators, and a Boston Police Department detective. Dylan called again at 12:20. You're where? I said, come to Veronica Hale's office. Suite 1000, 461 Congress Street. What? We made a deal, Uncle Tom. The office of my lawyer. The plans were altered. Come by yourself, Dylan, or don't come at all. At 12:45, he showed up. With Brooke at the back. When he saw how crowded the conference room was, his self-assured smile vanished. When the detective got up and introduced himself, the smile vanished entirely. I'm Detective Sean Callahan from the Boston Police Department. Mr. Gallagher. We have some inquiries about the passing of your father. Dylan's expression turned white. I don't get it. Dad suffered a stroke. It has already been decided by the medical examiner. Indeed. Well, Veronica said. We've asked for a more comprehensive examination. These power of attorney documents you've been using to assert ownership are among the financial irregularities at Gallagher's Restaurant Group that we have been investigating. Copies were slid across the table by her. With the clinical accuracy of an expert witness, Ethan Park proceeded with his forensic analysis, highlighting the forged signatures. Mr. Gallagher, all of your decisions claiming authority under these documents are null and void because they are fraudulent. Who forged these signatures is the question. Dylan gave Brooke a look. Brooke glanced at her phone. Dylan remarked, I want a lawyer. Detective Sean Callahan said, You're right. However, you should be aware that the toxicology results were returned this morning before you leave. Suanylcholine levels were high in your father's body. This paralyzing medication is frequently used in healthcare settings. When taken in excess, it can mimic a stroke by causing respiratory failure. Very difficult to find unless you're looking for it. He hesitated. Your spouse was employed in the pharmaceutical industry. Medical supplies were available to her. The key to your father's apartment was also in her possession. She was seen there several times in the weeks prior to his death, according to several neighbors. Brooke got up so quickly that her chair fell back. I took no action. This is absurd. Tell them, Dylan. Dylan, however, was not observing her. His gaze was fixed on the table. A mask of crumbling denial covered his face. We deleted your text messages as well. The ones between you and Brooke, according to one of the DA investigators. Brooke complained about the weight, you calculated inheritance values, you talked about how long your father would last, and, Veronica added, there was a particularly intriguing message in which Brooke asked if you thought the medication she had been adding to his morning smoothies was working quickly enough. The exact symptoms Patrick had displayed could be brought on by the medication succinylcholine given gradually over several weeks. His doctors had diagnosed him with Alzheimer's disease because of his confusion, weakness, and rapid decline. When Dylan eventually raised his head, I noticed something in my nephew's eyes that I had never seen before. Fear, he muttered, we didn't mean for him to die. All we wanted was for him to be more perplexed, so that the power of attorney would appear authentic and people would think he had signed it. According to Brooke, the dosage was safe. With mascara streaming down her meticulously applied makeup, Brooke was now crying. We simply needed the money, and we were accelerating the inevitable. Dylan has been gambling. Dangerous people are what we owe. They were already being read their rights by Detective Sean Callahan. From the corridor came two officers in uniform. I saw Dylan, Brooke, and my nephew whom I had held as a baby, taught to ride a bike, and who had killed his own father for restaurants he couldn't even legally inherit, all placed in handcuffs. The trial went on for 7 weeks. The forensic evidence, falsified documents, and text messages that demonstrated months of preparation were presented by the prosecution. They brought in neighbors who had witnessed Brooke carrying smoothies from our restaurant into Patrick's apartment, claiming to be checking on her father-in-law. A pharmaceutical company whistleblower who verified that Brooke had been ordering succinylcholine, claiming it was for her sales demonstrations, testified on their behalf. Dylan's defense team attempted to place the blame on Brooke. The text messages contradicted his claims that he was unaware of the drug and didn't comprehend what she was doing. Messages in which he gave her encouragement, inquired about the effectiveness of the plan, and estimated the time until they could seize power. The jury rejected Brooke's defense's attempt to argue that Dylan had coerced her, and that she was a victim of his pressure and gambling debts. They came across two individuals who had determined that their ambition was more important than Patrick's life. On a chilly March afternoon, the decision was rendered. Both of them are guilty. Fraud, conspiracy, and first-degree murder. Dylan was given a life sentence without the possibility of release. Brooke's 30 came to life. She would give birth while incarcerated. That child, who would grow up knowing their parents were murderers, would be my grandnephew or niece. I felt nothing but emptiness as I sat in the courtroom gallery, where my nephew and brother had once been. Patrick was gone, but justice had been done. I didn't immediately return to the eateries. Dylan and Brooke had been standing there, strategizing, calculating, and waiting for my brother to pass away, and I couldn't face them. I remained in my Dorchester apartment, where I had resided for 22 years. I read the old letters from Patrick. I examined pictures. I allowed myself to mourn. I then realized what I needed to do when I woke up one April morning. I gave Veronica Hale a call. I'd like to reorganize the trust. What were you thinking of? The restaurants continue to be trusted by the family. However, I would like to add something new. A culinary scholarship fund for children from Dorchester, South Boston, and the areas where Patrick and I were raised. Children who aspire to be chefs but are unable to pay for culinary school. Veronica remained silent for a while. Tom, that's stunning. That would have delighted Patrick. It will be known as the Patrick Gallagher Memorial Scholarship. We will send 6 students to culinary school each year. Everything, including living expenses and full tuition. Additionally, they will have the opportunity to work at our restaurants after they graduate if they so choose. Like Patrick and I did, learn the company from the ground up. How about the property? Millions of dollars are worth those structures. The restaurant on Newbury Street is converted into a non-profit educational establishment. As part of their training, students work there. We maintain a high standard of quality and preserve my mother's recipes, but we prioritize education over profit. We continue to operate the other locations, but the profits go toward a new foundation I want to establish as well as the scholarship fund. What sort of base? Alzheimer's studies. Patrick vanished piece by piece for 4 years. That shouldn't have to happen to any family. Veronica assisted me with the setup. That fall, the first 6 recipients of the Patrick Gallagher Memorial Scholarship attended the Culinary Institute of America. $2.5 million was donated to Alzheimer's research by the Gallagher Family Foundation. Additionally, Gallagher's on Newbury Street evolved into a teaching restaurant where students learned how to conduct business ethically in addition to how to cook. Evelyn, my mother, who is now 94 and still very intelligent, attended the teaching restaurant's opening. She sobbed as she watched young chefs make her tomato sauce recipe in the kitchen she had inspired. She squeezed my hand and said, "Patrick would be so proud." At least I hope so, Ma. I'd like to believe that. Dylan occasionally writes letters from behind bars. They are in a box in my closet, unopened. I'm not prepared to read them yet. Perhaps I never will be. Some betrayals are too serious to be forgiven. However, each year when I witness 6 new students receive their Gallagher scholarships, watch them stand in our kitchen learning my mother's recipes, and listen to them discuss their aspirations and futures, I get the impression that Patrick is right next to me, smiling with tomato sauce on his apron, proud of what we have created together. What I've discovered is this. Greed is noisy and awkward. It is prone to errors. Evidence is left behind. It undervalues those it seeks to eradicate. However, genuine love for your family, your community, and the things you create together is quiet. It's patient. That is more powerful than any quantity of funds or aspirations. Dylan believed he was robbing eateries. He didn't realize that Patrick and I had created something that couldn't be taken. Neither the bank accounts nor the real estate had it. It was in our mother's recipes, in the staff who had been with us for decades, in each meal we proudly served, and in each client who had grown to be like family. Forging signatures is possible. It is possible to poison someone. You could attempt to appropriate their legacy. However, if it was constructed on a real foundation, it cannot be destroyed. I want to ask you a question now. Have you ever witnessed a loved one pass away due to illness or treachery? Have you ever had to defend your memory in front of people who were only interested in dollar signs? Share your story with me in the comments section below. I am reminded by your stories that I am not alone in this. Because sometimes the best after Dad's $4,800,000 estate opened, my blood sugar hit 658. My brother filmed instead of helping. 3 weeks later, labs proved he'd swapped my insulin with saline. I awoke on the restroom floor at 2:47 a.m. Paramedics strapped an oxygen mask on my face, while my brother stood in the doorway recording with his phone. Not helpful. Filming. My blood sugar level was 658. The usual range is 70 to 110. At 630, you begin to get diabetic ketoacidosis. At 760, you die. The lead paramedic continued asking when I had last taken my insulin, and I kept telling him 3 hours ago, right before bed, as I had done every night for the preceding 12 years. He gazed at my brother. My brother looked at his phone, and something about that interchange chilled my skin in a way that had nothing to do with the medical crisis actually killing me. The estate struggle began 7 weeks earlier, when our father died of a fatal heart attack at the age of 65, leaving behind a commercial real estate portfolio valued around $4.8 million. My father will share everything 50-50 between me and my brother Caleb. Simple, clean, and fair. Except Caleb had been Dad's business partner for the previous 9 years, while I had been teaching high school chemistry 3 states away. Caleb had access to all of the funds, assets, and papers. He'd been residing at Dad's house since the funeral, purportedly preparing things for probate. I drove down from Michigan to our hometown of Columbus, Ohio, 12 days after Dad died to remain at his house throughout the estate settlement. That's when my diabetes started acting up. I am 35 years old. I was diagnosed with type 1 diabetes when I was 24, shortly after graduating from college. It's been a part of my daily routine for more than 10 years. I understand my body. I recognize the warning signals of high blood sugar, extreme thirst, frequent urination, impaired vision, and exhaustion. I understand how excellent control feels against negative control. And I'd had great control for years. My latest A1C test, 4 months before Dad died, was 6.1, which is practically ideal for a diabetic. My endocrinologist, Dr. Michael S. Carter from Ann Arbor Medical Center, genuinely praised me at my previous checkup. So, when I began having hypoglycemic symptoms while taking my insulin on a regular basis, I blamed it on stress. Grief causes unexpected changes in your body. Cortisol levels increase. Sleep habits become interrupted. Food habits change. It seemed reasonable that my blood sugar would be more difficult to regulate. Except, it wasn't only more difficult to control, it was totally uncontrolled. Before injecting long-acting insulin at night, I would check my blood sugar. Let us pretend it was 135. Slightly high but doable. I would inject my customary dose of 36 units, which I had been taking for 2 years. Then I'd check again in the morning, anticipating it to be anywhere between 90 and 110. Instead, it would read 380, 420, or 511. I hadn't seen these numbers since I was initially diagnosed and had no idea how to control the condition. Numbers that didn't make sense considering my insulin regimen. I began monitoring my blood sugar every 2 hours and even set alarms to wake up during the night. The trend was constant and disturbing. My insulin simply wasn't functioning. I phoned Dr. Carter's office on a Thursday morning after a particularly horrible night in which my blood sugar reached 512. I spoke with Lauren Hayes, his nurse practitioner who had been overseeing my treatment for the previous 20 months. She asked all the appropriate questions. Have I modified my diet? No. Was I unwell from an infection? No. Was I experiencing extraordinary stress? Well, yeah. My father had recently died and I was dealing with his inheritance. She indicated that stress hormones might definitely develop insulin resistance, making my regular dosages less effective. She upped my overnight long-acting dose from 36 to 44 units and instructed me to call back in 4 days if things did not improve. They did not improve. They became worse. Caleb was quite helpful throughout this time. He saw I wasn't feeling well and kept asking if he could help. He'd bring me bottles of water whenever I mentioned being thirsty. He'd offer to prepare dinner so that I could relax. He'd ask about my blood sugar levels and shake his head compassionately when I informed him they were high. One night, he sat with me in the kitchen while I prepared my injection. Is it scary? He inquired, observing me draw insulin from the container into the syringe. Knowing you must do this every day or you will die. I advised him to get accustomed to it. You don't fully consider the stakes anymore. It becomes routine, much like cleaning your teeth. He nodded slowly and looked at the vial of insulin on the counter. Where do you keep it? In the fridge. I informed him. Yes, in the door of the upstairs bathroom fridge, the small one Dad installed when Mom was sick. Caleb was aware that he had previously lived in this house, but he inquired nevertheless. The estate lawyer, Thomas Whitaker of Whitaker and Associates, planned our first official meeting for Monday morning, 4 weeks after I arrived. I was feeling really bad by that moment. The persistently elevated blood sugar was creating a variety of secondary symptoms. Constant exhaustion, difficulties concentration, and blurry eyesight made reading texts uncomfortable. Frequent visits to the restroom disrupted the conference several times. Whitaker often paused his explanation of the probate procedure to ask if I wanted a break. I continued apologizing and explaining that I was all right, just struggling with some health concerns. Caleb sat across the meeting table, hands folded, appearing worried and patient. Maybe we should reschedule, he said after my third restroom trip. You clearly aren't feeling well. Whitaker agreed that it could be best. We rescheduled on the following Monday. I left the meeting feeling ashamed and irritated. I had seemed incompetent in front of our father's lawyer. Worse, I had appeared unstable, as if I couldn't handle fundamental adult obligations. That evening I upped my insulin dosage without first phoning Dr. Carter's office. I took 58 units rather than 44. It was foolish and even hazardous to take such a large jump without medical supervision, but I was desperate. I needed to get my blood sugar under control before our next appointment with Whitaker. I couldn't afford to appear distraught during the estate processes. My blood sugar level before bedtime was 371. The following morning, it was 552. I had taken 58 units of long-acting insulin, and my blood sugar had risen by 181 points. That isn't how insulin works. That is not how any of this works. Something wasn't right with me. Something outside stress, bereavement, or insulin resistance. I scheduled an appointment with a local endocrinologist, Dr. Allison Grant, at Columbus Diabetes Associates, and was seen 2 days later after stressing the situation was an emergency. Dr. Grant was in her late 40s, with gray-streaked hair and the calm, analytical manner of a specialist dealing with a medical emergency. She looked at my blood sugar logs, insulin dosage data, and a recent A1C test from Michigan. Then she examined me, looking for evidence of lipohypertrophy, a kind of scar tissue that might interfere with insulin absorption. Everything seemed perfect. She ordered a full blood workup, which included a C-peptide test to assess my pancreatic function, a hormone imbalance screening, and an insulin antibody test. I'm going to be honest with you, she added, removing her exam gloves. The presentation does not make physiological sense. You should respond to these insulin dosages. We need to find out why you aren't. The blood test was returned within 36 hours. Everything was usual. My pancreas was not making insulin, as predicted for type 1 diabetes. My thyroid function was fine. There is no illness, no hormonal imbalance, and no insulin antibodies. Dr. Grant phoned me personally to explain the findings. I want you to come back in and bring your insulin vials, she told me. All of them, including the ones you're using now and any backups you have. I'd like to test them. I asked her what she felt was wrong. There was a lengthy delay on the line. I don't want to speculate until we rule out environmental factors, she explained cautiously. However, if your insulin is incorrectly maintained or contaminated, this might explain why it isn't working. Can you come tomorrow morning? I said yes. I grabbed all of my insulin vials that evening. I had 3. The one I was using from the bathroom fridge, a backup in the same fridge, and an unopened one in my luggage case from Michigan. I arranged them on my dresser to bring to Dr. Grant in the morning. Then I headed downstairs to prepare dinner. Caleb was in the kitchen, staring at his phone. Are you okay? He inquired, looking up. You've seemed stressed lately. I assured him I was all right, but annoyed with my blood sugar concerns. He nodded compassionately. So, let me know if there's anything I can do to assist. We're in this together, right? Dad would have wanted us to take care of one another. I thanked him and reheated the leftovers. After supper, I returned upstairs to prepare my nightly injection. When I reached for the vials on my dresser, the backup vial was in a different location than I had placed it. Not much altered, but slightly displaced, about an inch to the left, something you may miss if you weren't paying attention. My hands became shaky. I told myself I was too paranoid. I persuaded myself that the stress of Dad's death, the estate processes, and my medical concerns, were causing me to perceive conspiracies where none existed. I assured myself Caleb wouldn't do that. He was my brother. We had grown up together. We had shared a room until I went to college. He'd been there when I was initially diagnosed with diabetes, teaching me how to administer injections and monitor my blood sugar levels. He phoned me every few months to see how I was doing and whether my diabetes was under control. He cared for me. But I also recall what Dad had stated approximately a year before his death. During one of our phone discussions, he said that Caleb had been pressing for a change in the business structure that would make Caleb the major owner and Dad a silent partner. Dad had refused. I built this company, he had stated. I'm not signing it away while I'm still alive and capable. Caleb had been furious with the choice. Very furious. I did not take my insulin that night. Instead, I visited a 24-hour pharmacy and purchased 3 fresh vials with my insurance. They were pricey, at $110 each, even with insurance. But I had to know. I needed to exclude the idea that something was amiss with my existing supply. I took my nightly dosage with one of the brand new drugstore vials. My blood sugar level before the injection was 382. When I woke up the next morning and tested again, it was 109. Which is normal, healthy, and exactly where it should be. After an appropriate dosage of long-acting insulin, I sat on the side of my bed, looking at the glucose meter display, feeling chilly all over my body. The insulin from the pharmacist worked. The insulin from my bathroom fridge did not work, indicating that my medicine had been tampered with. I phoned Dr. Grant and informed her that I had found out the problem. She questioned what I meant. I described buying fresh insulin at the pharmacy and receiving a normal result for the first time in weeks. She paused for a bit before saying, "Bring in all of your old vials today if possible. I'm going to have them evaluated by our lab and file a report with the Ohio Board of Pharmacy. If your medicine was tampered with, this is a serious offense." I agreed to come in within an hour. Then I went to the bathroom fridge and got the vials. The current one I was using was still there. The backup vial was gone. I had noticed it the night before on my dresser. It wasn't in either the bathroom or my bedroom. I looked for 25 minutes before acknowledging the apparent reality. Someone had snatched it. Someone who realized I was growing suspicious. Someone gained access to the house and my stuff. Someone who was my brother. I drove to Dr. Grant's office with the 2 leftover vials. The one I was currently using, and the unopened one from my Michigan travel case. Dr. Grant greeted me in an exam room with a worried expression that made her appear older than she did at our initial session. She gave over the vials to a lab worker who photographed them and filled out chain of custody documents. "These will go to Ohio State's Medical Forensics Lab," Dr. Grant added. "They may evaluate the contents to see whether there has been any replacement or contamination. The procedure takes around 4 to 6 business days." I asked her what she believed had happened. She selected her words carefully. "In my 17 years of practicing endocrinology, I've encountered 3 instances of pharmaceutical manipulation. Both included family members with financial incentives. I cannot make allegations, but anybody with access to your insulin might readily replace it with saline solution or another transparent liquid. The vials appear identical. Without advanced testing, you'd never know." I did not return to Dad's place that night. I got into a downtown hotel and paid with cash since I didn't want Caleb to be able to monitor my credit card. I sat in my hotel room, reflecting on everything that had transpired during the previous 4 weeks. My blood sugar difficulties began shortly after I arrived at the residence. Caleb's remarkable care, giving me water, inquiring about my diabetes control, seeing me prepare injections, and his query about where I kept my insulin, which he already knew but asked nevertheless. At the rescheduled estate conference, I appeared incompetent and unstable, just the type of person whose judgment could be challenged in probate court. The missing backup vial from the night made me suspect. And at the heart of it all, there's the money. $4.8 million shared between two brothers, unless one brother is judged unable to manage his inheritance. I contacted the Columbus Police non-emergency number and requested to talk with someone about a possible attempted murder. The dispatcher connected me with Detective Marcus Reed of the Major Crimes Unit. Reed had worked with CPD for 21 years, according to the brief history he provided me when we met at the station the next morning. He was in his mid-40s, with graying hair and sad eyes from witnessing too many betrayals inside his family. I told him everything. Dad's death, the multi-million-dollar inheritance, my odd blood sugar issue, the insulin that stopped functioning, the lost backup vial, and the drugstore insulin that worked wonderfully. Reed listened without interrupting and took notes on a yellow legal pad. When I finished, he put down his pen and stared directly at me. "Do you still have access to your father's home?" he asked. I said, "Yes, I still had my key." "Don't go back there alone," Reed said. "If what you're saying is correct, your brother tried to murder you. The fact that he's photographing your medical emergency shows that he's documenting your alleged instability for legal reasons. This was deliberate. This is sophisticated. This is someone who has planned every step." Detective Reed directed Officer Nolan Park to accompany me back to the residence to grab my possessions and any evidence. Park was younger, perhaps in his early 30s, with an intense focus that made you feel both safe and little apprehensive. We got at the house about 10:30 a.m. on a Friday. Caleb's automobile was gone. I let us in with my key and immediately went upstairs to the bathroom. The insulin vial I had been using was still inside the refrigerator door. Park shot it in place before carefully bagging it as evidence, using a body camera to film the entire process. Next, we searched my bedroom. Park discovered an empty insulin bottle in the trash bin next to my dresser, buried among crumpled papers and tissues. Not one of mine, but an extra vial mistakenly dumped by someone who assumed it would be disposed of with the ordinary trash. Park also grabbed that. We then searched Caleb's room. I felt bad about it. Invasive, as if I was breaking some basic trust between brothers. However, Park was thorough and professional, inspecting drawers and closets with trained skill. In Caleb's bedside table, below a stack of financial paperwork pertaining to Dad's estate, Park found a box of saline solution vials, the sort used for wound irrigation or medical treatments. If you don't look closely at the label, it appears precisely like insulin. Park held up the box without touching it directly, using a pen to flip up the top. 2 vials were missing from the original box of 10. Park shot everything from numerous angles, then bagged the entire package. "We'll test these against your insulin vials," he added. "If the contents match, we have physical evidence of substitution. Combined with the medical paperwork from your doctor, this creates a prosecutable case." We were placing the evidence into Park's patrol cruiser when Caleb's vehicle came into the driveway. He climbed out slowly, glancing between me, the uniformed officer, and the evidence bags with an expression that cycled through perplexity, concern, and something more. Something calculated. "What's going on?" he asked, directing the question at me rather than Park. "Is everything okay? Did anything happen?" I did not say anything. Park went forward with his badge displayed. "I'm Officer Nolan Park with Columbus PD. We're collecting evidence related to an ongoing investigation. Do you live at this residence?" Caleb nodded, his gaze never leaving my face. "This is my father's house. My brother and I are both residing here while we settle the estate. What investigation? What evidence?" Park didn't answer. Instead, he requested Caleb to move aside as we completed loading the van. Caleb obeyed, but I could see his mind working, trying to figure out what I knew and what I might show. Detective Marcus Reed phoned me that evening with preliminary results from Ohio State's medical forensics lab. They'd fast-tracked the analysis given the attempted murder claims. The vial you were actively using, Reed continued, contains approximately 80% saline solution and 20% insulin. Not enough insulin to be medically useful, but enough that you wouldn't quickly know something was wrong. The saline dilution explains why your blood sugar kept increasing after taking what you believed were enough doses. The unopened vial from your travel case is pure insulin, no tampering, and the empty vial we found in your trash matches the saline solution boxes in your brother's room. Same manufacturer, same batch number. I inquired what occurred next. Now we build the case, Reed remarked. We have physical evidence, medical documentation, and opportunity. What we need is motivation testimony, and any proof proving your brother's financial interest in you, seeming incompetent. I called Thomas Whitaker, the estate attorney, and demanded copies of every correspondence between him and Caleb over the preceding 7 weeks. Whitaker was professionally reluctant, until I indicated there was a current police investigation into alleged estate fraud and attempted murder. That changed his tone dramatically. He sent over the emails within 2 hours. There were 41 messages total. Most were standard queries regarding probate processes and property appraisals, but 6 communications sent over the period of 12 days voiced worries about my abilities to manage my inheritance. The first email was sent 4 days after I arrived at the residence. I'm worried about my brother's health. He appears highly unorganized and is having problems controlling his diabetes. Is there a method for medical examination if one successor looks unable to perform financial responsibilities? The second email followed 6 days later. My brother had to leave our meeting multiple times due to health issues and seemed confused about basic estate details. I want to make sure he's safeguarded, even if it requires greater oversight of his portion. The cycle continued, each communication meticulously documenting my seeming deterioration, while posing Caleb as the worried responsible sibling seeking to safeguard both of us. Dr. Grant provided a comprehensive medical report detailing my 12-year history of excellent diabetes management, my recent unexplained hypoglycemic crisis, and the immediate normalization of my blood sugar once I switched to uncompromised insulin. Based on the patient's medical history and the laboratory confirmation of insulin tampering, she wrote in her conclusion, "It is my professional opinion that the patient's hypoglycemic episodes were iatrogenically induced through intentional medication substitution. Without intervention, the patient would have progressed to diabetic ketoacidosis, coma, and likely death within days to weeks." She attached my blood sugar logs, showing the dramatic contrast between the 4 weeks of using tampered insulin and the immediate improvement with pharmacy insulin. The documentation was devastating and indisputable. Detective Reed brought Caleb in for questioning on a Monday morning, exactly 5 weeks after the paramedics had found me unconscious on the bathroom floor. I wasn't present for the interview, but Reed recorded everything and played portions back for me later. Caleb maintained his innocence throughout, claiming he had no idea how saline solution ended up in his bedside table, suggesting maybe I'd planted it there to frame him out of grief-induced paranoia. He said he'd been nothing but supportive during my health crisis, that his emails to the estate attorney were genuine expressions of concern, not attempts to undermine my competency. When Reed presented him with the test proof confirming the insulin had been tampered with, Caleb argued maybe the pharmacy had made a mistake, or maybe my diabetes had merely moved to a more severe level. His explanations grew increasingly desperate and contradictory as the interview continued. The breakthrough came when Reed asked Caleb about the video footage, the footage from my medical emergency, which Caleb had filmed on his phone instead of helping. "Why were you recording your brother during a medical crisis?" Reed asked. There was a long silence on the recording. Then Caleb said something that destroyed any remaining pretense of innocence. "I needed documentation for the estate proceedings to show he wasn't capable of managing his portion." Reed asked him to clarify. "Documentation of what specifically?" Another pause. "Of his mental state, his instability." The lawyer said it would be helpful if there were concerns about competency. Reed pressed further. "So you were documenting your brother's medical emergencies to use against him in a state court, and you saw no reason to help him instead. Caleb realized his mistake too late. He tried to backtrack, claiming he'd called 911 first before recording, that he'd only filmed for a few seconds, but the damage was done. He'd admitted to documenting my crisis for legal advantage rather than providing help. The Ohio prosecutor's office filed charges 4 days later. Attempted murder, assault with a deadly weapon, the tampered insulin qualified as a weapon under Ohio law, and estate fraud. The prosecutor, Madeline Pierce, had spent 14 years in major crimes and had a reputation for being thorough and merciless with white-collar criminals who hurt family members. She scheduled a preliminary hearing for 12 days out. In the meantime, Detective Reed executed a search warrant for all of Caleb's electronic devices, his phone, laptop, tablet, and cloud storage accounts. The digital forensics team found things that made the case even worse. Caleb had researched insulin tampering methods 4 weeks before Dad died. He'd visited forums discussing how to induce diabetic crises without being detected. He'd researched estate competency laws and medical conservatorship procedures. He'd even calculated how long it would take for sustained hypoglycemia to cause permanent organ damage or death. Every search, every calculation, every research query had been saved in his browser history like a roadmap of premeditated attempted murder. But the most damaging evidence came from Caleb's text messages with his girlfriend, someone named Rebecca Dalton, who worked in medical billing at a local hospital. The messages went back 7 months to before Dad's death. In them, Caleb complained about having to share the estate 1/2 to 1/2 when he'd done all the work building Dad's business. He wrote things like, "Why should he get half when he's been gone for years, and there has to be a way to contest the will." Rebecca had apparently suggested using my diabetes against me. Doesn't he have to take insulin every day? What if something happened with that? Like if he seemed really sick or unstable? Caleb's response: "That's genius. If he can't manage his own health, how can he manage millions of dollars?" The text chain continued over weeks, with Rebecca providing information about insulin storage and effectiveness, Caleb planning when to make the switch, and both of them discussing how to document my decline for legal purposes. The preliminary hearing was brief and brutal. Prosecutor Pierce presented the physical evidence, the medical documentation, the text messages, and the search history. Caleb's attorney, a public defender named Daniel Mercer, who looked increasingly uncomfortable as the evidence mounted, argued that the case was circumstantial, that the text messages were taken out of context, that Caleb's research could have been motivated by genuine concern for my health. Judge Evelyn Hart, who'd been on the bench for 24 years and had presided over some of Ohio's most notorious family crime cases, wasn't buying it. "Counsel," she said, removing her glasses and addressing Mercer directly. "Your client researched how to make someone diabetic appear unstable, purchased the materials to tamper with medication, had access to the victim's medication storage, exchanged texts, planning this exact scenario, and filmed the resulting medical crisis instead of providing aid. At what point does this stop being circumstantial and start being a clear pattern of intentional harm?" She bound Caleb over for trial with bail set at $600,000. He couldn't make bail. He stayed in county lockup, awaiting trial. The estate proceedings took a different turn after the charges were filed. Thomas Whitaker filed a motion to pause probate pending the outcome of the criminal trial. Ohio has a slayer statute that prevents criminals from inheriting from their victims. And while Dad's death itself was natural causes, the argument was that Caleb's attempt to murder me for my inheritance disqualified him from benefiting from Dad's estate. Judge Hart agreed to pause the proceedings until the criminal case concluded. In the meantime, the court appointed a neutral third-party administrator to manage Dad's properties and accounts. I was relieved. I didn't want the money anymore. I just wanted to understand how my brother, someone I'd grown up with and trusted completely, could look at me and see nothing but an obstacle to wealth. The trial took place 5 months after my near-death experience. The prosecution's case was methodical and overwhelming. Dr. Grant testified about the medical impossibility of my blood sugar crisis occurring naturally given my history. Dr. Carter, my Michigan endocrinologist, testified via video about my years of excellent control. The Ohio State forensic chemist testified about the insulin dilution and saline substitution. Detective Reed testified about finding the empty vial in my trash and the saline boxes in Caleb's room. Officer Park testified about the evidence collection. The digital forensic specialist testified about Caleb's research history and text messages. And I testified about watching my brother film me during a medical emergency instead of helping. About the missing backup insulin vial. About realizing someone I loved had spent weeks systematically poisoning me. Caleb's defense was weak and desperate. Attorney Mercer tried to argue that Rebecca Dalton had been the mastermind, that she'd manipulated Caleb into this scheme, that he'd just been going along with her suggestions without really understanding the consequences. The jury didn't buy it. Caleb was 37 years old, a successful businessman who'd co-managed a multi-million-dollar real estate portfolio. He wasn't some naive victim led astray by a girlfriend. The text messages showed him actively planning, researching, and executing the medication tampering. Rebecca was charged separately as an accomplice and took a plea deal, agreeing to testify against Caleb in exchange for a reduced sentence. Her testimony was devastating. She described how Caleb had asked her for advice about making someone look medically unreliable. How he'd specifically mentioned my diabetes as a vulnerability. How he'd laughed about me getting sicker while he documented everything for the estate case. The jury deliberated for under 2 hours. Guilty on all counts. Attempted murder in the first degree. Assault with a deadly weapon. Estate fraud. Judge Evelyn Hart scheduled sentencing for 12 days later. When that day came, she delivered a statement that I'll remember for the rest of my life. "Mr. Parker," she said, addressing Caleb directly as he stood in his orange jumpsuit and restraints. "You looked at your brother and saw only money. You took his trust, his love, and his medical vulnerability and weaponized them in service of greed. You researched how to kill him slowly enough that it would look like natural causes or medical mismanagement. You documented his suffering not to help, but to use against him. You stole weeks of his life and nearly stole all of it. This court finds your actions to be among the most callous and calculated it has encountered." She sentenced him to 21 years in state prison with no possibility of parole for the first 14. Rebecca Dalton got 6 years for conspiracy and accomplice to attempted murder. The estate proceedings resumed after the conviction. Under Ohio's Slayer statute, Caleb was disqualified from inheriting anything from Dad's estate. His entire one-half share reverted to me by default. I inherited everything. The properties, the business, the bank accounts, all $4.8 million, plus the appreciation that had occurred during the 9 months of legal proceedings. Thomas Whitaker handled the final transfer with professional efficiency. When he handed me the last document to sign, he said something that struck me as both true and terrible. "Your father built this legacy to provide for both his sons. It must break his heart, wherever he is, to know one son tried to murder the other for it." I signed the papers and walked out of Whitaker's office as the sole heir to everything Dad had worked for, and all I felt was empty. I moved back to Michigan 12 days later. I couldn't stay in Columbus. Couldn't live in Dad's house where my brother had spent weeks slowly poisoning me while I slept down the hall. I sold the house and most of the properties, keeping only 3 small commercial buildings that generated steady rental income. The money went into trust accounts managed by financial advisors I'd never met, people with no connection to my family or our history. I didn't want to think about it, didn't want to manage it, didn't want the wealth that had almost killed me. I went back to teaching high school chemistry. My students had no idea what I'd been through. They just knew me as Mr. Parker, the teacher who sometimes used diabetes management as an example when teaching about biochemistry and molecular interactions. Dr. Carter recommended I see a therapist to process everything that had happened. I started seeing Dr. Sophia Ramirez, a trauma specialist in Ann Arbor, who'd worked with victims of family violence. The first few sessions were just me trying to articulate how it felt to realize my brother had watched me get sicker and done nothing, had actively made me sicker, had filmed my near-death experience like it was content for his legal case. Dr. Ramirez helped me understand that betrayal trauma is different from other types of trauma because it destroys your baseline ability to trust. You have to rebuild your sense of safety from the ground up. She said, you have to learn that what happened with your brother was specific to him, not representative of all relationships or all family bonds. It took months before I could even begin to believe that. I still check my insulin obsessively. Every vial gets inspected before use. I bought a small safe for my medication, and I'm the only one with the combination. I test my blood sugar more frequently than necessary, paranoid that somehow the numbers will start climbing again, even though I know rationally that I'm using uncompromised insulin from sealed pharmacy containers. The trauma left marks that go beyond the physical. My current A1C is back to 6.3. Excellent control, according to Dr. Carter. But the psychological cost of what Caleb did can't be measured in blood glucose levels or hemoglobin markers. I visited Caleb in prison once, about 14 months after his conviction. I don't know why I went. Maybe I needed closure. Maybe I needed to hear him explain how he justified it to himself. Maybe I needed to see him in that gray prison uniform and understand that justice had been served. We sat across from each other in the visitation room with a plexiglass barrier between us and phones connecting our voices. He looked older, smaller somehow, diminished by incarceration. I asked him why. Why had he done it? He was quiet for a long time. Then he said, I convinced myself you didn't deserve it. Half of everything Dad built. You left, went to Michigan, became a teacher. I stayed here, worked with him every day, learned the business. In my mind, I'd earned it all, and you'd earned nothing. The money became more important than you being alive. I don't know when that happened, but it did. I asked if he was sorry. He nodded. Every single day. But that doesn't change anything, does it? I told him. No, it didn't. Then I hung up the phone and left. I haven't been back. The weird thing about surviving attempted murder by a family member is that people don't know how to talk to you about it. They offer condolences like you've lost someone to natural causes. They say things like, at least he's in prison now, as if incarceration equals healing. They avoid asking questions because they don't want to be intrusive. So you end up carrying the story alone. My colleagues at the high school know what happened. It made local news in Michigan too. But no one mentions it. I'm just the chemistry teacher who takes insulin before lunch and sometimes zones out during faculty meetings because I'm remembering what it felt like to wake up with paramedics strapping a mask to my face while my brother stood in the doorway filming. Dr. Ramirez says, I'm making progress. I've started dating again cautiously and with significant trust issues that I'm upfront about from the start. I've reconnected with friends I'd pulled away from during the estate proceedings. I've established new routines that feel safe and controllable. But there are still moments when the weight of everything crashes down, like when I'm preparing my nighttime injection and I have a flash of panic wondering if the insulin is real. Or when I pass estate planning offices and remember sitting in Whitaker's conference room feeling like I was dying while my brother calmly documented my incompetence for legal advantage. Or when I see news stories about families torn apart by inheritance disputes, and I think about how Dad never could have imagined his estate would become my attempted murder weapon. The money from Dad's estate sits in accounts I rarely access. I live on my teacher's salary, about $68,000 a year, which is enough for a decent apartment and a reliable car, and the occasional weekend trip. The inheritance feels like blood money, tainted by what Caleb did to get it. But Dr. Ramirez reminds me that Dad wanted me to have it. That using it doesn't mean accepting what Caleb did. That I'm allowed to benefit from my father's legacy without carrying guilt for my brother's crimes. Rationally, I understand that. Emotionally, I'm still working on it. I've started using small amounts to fund diabetes research at the Ohio State Medical School, and to support programs teaching high school students about science and medicine. If Dad's money has to be part of my life, at least it can do some good. Sometimes I wonder if Caleb thinks about what he lost. Not the inheritance or the properties or the business partnership with Dad. Those are just money and assets. I wonder if he thinks about losing a brother. If he remembers the years before greed made me into a target instead of family. We used to be close, or I thought we were. We'd call each other every few months to catch up. We'd visit during holidays when our schedules aligned. He'd helped me through my diabetes diagnosis, learning about the disease alongside me so he could understand what I was dealing with. Or maybe that was research too. Maybe he was always calculating, always looking for advantages, always seeing relationships as transactions. I'll never know which memories were real and which were strategy. Judge Hart's words come back to me often. You looked at your brother and saw only money. That's what haunts me most. Not the physical danger, not even the betrayal itself, but the reduction of everything we'd been to each other down to a dollar amount. $2.4 million to be exact. That's what my half of the estate was worth. That's what Caleb decided was worth watching me die. The math is simple and horrifying. My life, my trust, our shared childhood, our father's love for both of us. All of it calculated and found less valuable than money. You can't come back from understanding that. You can't unknow that equation. I still have the glucometer reading from that first morning after using the pharmacy insulin. 109. Normal, safe, proof that my body wasn't failing, that my diabetes hadn't suddenly become uncontrollable, that the crisis was manufactured. I kept the printout in a drawer for months, looking at it sometimes when I needed to remind myself that I wasn't crazy, that my suspicions had been justified, that the person who tried to kill me was actually imprisoned for it and not walking around free. Dr. Ramirez eventually suggested I let go of that printout, that holding on to physical evidence was keeping me stuck in survival mode when I needed to move toward recovery. I threw it away, but I still remember the number 109, the proof that saved my life. The criminal case made local news, but never went national. Ohio teachers didn't recognize my name or my story when I returned to Michigan. I was grateful for that anonymity. I could rebuild my life without carrying the label of that guy, whose brother tried to kill him for inheritance money. My students know me as someone who explains molecular bonds with enthusiasm and occasionally brings in donuts for the class. My neighbors know me as the quiet guy in Unit 4C who's pleasant in the elevator and always sorts his recycling correctly. My therapist knows the full story and a few close friends know the outline. But most of my world is built on normal interactions that have nothing to do with attempted murder or family betrayal or estate fraud. That normality is precious and a hard one. There are good days now. Days where I don't think about Caleb or the tampered insulin or the paramedics finding me on the bathroom floor. Days where my diabetes is just a manageable chronic condition rather than a weapon someone used against me. Days where I can enjoy teaching chemistry without the irony of explaining how molecules interact while remembering that someone used molecular manipulation to try to kill me. Those days are increasing in frequency, and Dr. Ramirez says that's the definition of healing. Not forgetting what happened, but reducing how much space it takes up in your daily existence. I'm working on that. Some days are easier than others. I keep Dad's watch, the one Mom gave him on their 20th anniversary. Caleb hadn't wanted it during the estate division because it wasn't worth much monetarily. Just a regular Seiko with a leather band worn from years of daily use. But it was Dad's, and wearing it makes me feel connected to the parent who loved both of his sons and never imagined one would try to murder the other. Sometimes I wonder what Dad would say if he knew what happened. Whether he'd understand how money corrupted Caleb. Whether he'd blame himself for building an estate valuable enough to kill for. Whether he'd forgive either of us, me for surviving and keeping everything, Caleb for attempting murder and losing everything. I'll never know. Dad died thinking his sons would take care of each other after he was gone. Instead, one of us tried to kill the other before the funeral flowers had wilted. I got a letter from Caleb 2 months ago. The prison screened it and forwarded it to my attorney first, protocol for contact between criminals and their victims. The letter was 2 pages, handwritten, full of apologies and regrets and explanations that didn't really explain anything. He wrote about the moment he decided to tamper with my insulin. How he'd convinced himself it was just to make me look unreliable for a few weeks, not to actually kill me. How things had spiraled beyond his original intent. How he wished he could take it back. How he understood if I never forgave him. how he hoped I was doing okay and managing my diabetes well. The cognitive dissonance of that last line, hoping I'm managing the disease he'd weaponized against me, would be funny if it wasn't so tragic. My attorney asked if I wanted to respond. I said, no. What would I even say? Some betrayals are too profound for communication to bridge. Next month marks 4 years since the night I woke up on the bathroom floor with my blood sugar at 658. 4 years since my brother filmed my near death instead of helping. 4 years since I learned that the person who'd grown up sharing a room with me could look at me and see only an obstacle to wealth. Dr. Ramirez says anniversaries of trauma are difficult, that I should expect the memories to feel more intense as the date approaches. She's right. I've been having more nightmares lately. Dreams where I'm checking my blood sugar and the numbers keep climbing no matter how much insulin I take. Dreams where I'm searching for the tampered vials but can't find them. Dreams where I'm trying to tell someone what's happening, but no one believes me. I wake up and check my glucometer immediately, confirming that my blood sugar is normal, that the insulin is working, that I'm safe. It takes a while for my heart rate to settle. The inheritance money funded a diabetes education program at my high school. I worked with the district to create a comprehensive curriculum teaching students about metabolic disorders, insulin function, and the daily realities of chronic disease management. We bring in endocrinologists to speak, demonstrate continuous glucose monitors, and explain how modern medicine allows diabetics to live normal lives. I don't tell the students why I started this program or what happened with my brother. I just teach them that diabetes is manageable, that insulin is life-saving, and that understanding biochemistry can literally save lives. One of my students, a girl named Haley, who was diagnosed with type 1 last year, told me the program helped her feel less alone and less afraid. That made everything feel slightly more bearable. Dad's money filtered through Caleb's crime and my survival, helping a 16-year-old girl understand she's going to be okay. It's not redemption, but it's something. I still teach chemistry. I still take my insulin. I still check my blood sugar religiously. I still see Dr. Ramirez every week. I still avoid Columbus and anything associated with Dad's estate. I still have nightmares about my brother standing in the doorway with his phone out filming. But I'm alive. That's the irreducible fact underneath everything else. Caleb tried to kill me methodically and deliberately over the course of 4 weeks. He researched it, planned it, executed it, and documented it. And I'm still here. That survival doesn't erase the trauma or heal the betrayal, but it matters. Judge Hart said Caleb stole weeks of my life and nearly stole all of it. But he didn't. He's in prison serving 21 years. And I'm in Michigan teaching students about molecular bonds and living a quiet life he tried to take from me. The last thing Dr. Ramirez said in our most recent session was about reclaiming narrative. Your brother wrote a story where you were an obstacle to be removed, she said. But you're writing a different story now. One where you're a survivor, a teacher, someone who took incomprehensible betrayal and transformed it into advocacy and education. That's your narrative. That's your power. I'm still figuring out what that means in practice. Some days I feel powerful, like I've overcome something tremendous and emerged stronger. Other days I feel broken, like the trust Caleb shattered left cracks that will never fully heal. Both things are probably true. Both narratives exist simultaneously. I'm a survivor and I'm wounded. I inherited everything, and I lost my brother. I'm safe now, and I'll never feel completely safe again. That's the reality of living after attempted murder by family. You carry all of it forward, the survival and the scars, and you build whatever life you can from what remains.